Hello everyone, you're listening to Sleepwalker Radio. If our stories help you sleep or relax, please like, comment, and subscribe. Now close your eyes, and let's begin. It was sometime in the early 2000s, probably my senior year of high school, or maybe the first year of college. It was that weird time in life where all your friends are still around, but everything is starting to change. Everyone's figuring themselves out. We didn't have a ton of money or anywhere really important to be, so most nights we're just driving around looking for something interesting to do. Some of us were into local legends and urban exploration, the kind of stuff you'd find in weird NJ books. Old asylums, train tunnels, forgotten roads, things like that. If it was creepy and somewhat hard to find, we were probably driving towards it. That night was one of those typical overcast New Jersey nights where it had rained all day and didn't really dry out. The air was heavy, wet, and had that thick smell of damp earth and gasoline mixed together. Flash flood warnings were going off on the radio earlier in the afternoon, but no one really cared. We had made up our minds about going out, and some heavy rain wasn't going to stop us. That's just how we were back then, dumb, stubborn, and restless. The spot we picked was an abandoned oil refinery. I'm not going to name it, but if you're from Jersey and you ever did this kind of stuff, you probably already know which one I'm talking about. It was one of those places that had a half-rumored history. Some people said there was an accident there decades ago. Others said it just got shut down because of violations. Either way, it had been sitting there for years, left to rot in the middle of nowhere, hidden behind overgrowth and forgotten train tracks. We had 2 cars that night. My buddy Mike was driving a Chevy Blazer, a boxy, beat-up SUV with more rust than paint by that point. I was in my old Honda Accord, a small, low sedan that I probably shouldn't have even taken off pavement, let alone into a place like this. We had about 8 or 9 people total. Some of us were packed in the back seats, squeezed together with hoodies on, passing around energy drinks and junk food. We didn't do drugs or drink. This was more of a thrill-seeking thing for us. It was about the adrenaline and the stories afterward. We got there close to midnight. The drive took us down this long, narrow road with no lights and trees crowding in from both sides. It was the kind of road where your headlights only showed you what was directly in front of you, and everything else just looked like a black wall. At some point we passed through a chain-link gate that was hanging open. It might have been locked at one time, but by the looks of it, people had been coming in and out for years. We didn't talk much on the way in. The tires made this sucking sound on the wet gravel, and occasionally one of the guys in the back would comment on how creepy everything felt. It did feel off, but that was the point. The buildings came into view slowly. They weren't tall, but they were wide, steel skeletons with rotting wood, peeling paint, rusted-out tanks, and long, twisted pipes that reached into the ground or curved back over themselves like old bones. It looked like the place had just been abandoned overnight, left to fall apart. We followed the driveway up toward the main building, our headlights sweeping over broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. That's when we saw the water. It was massive. Not a puddle. This thing was almost like a shallow lake, probably 30 or 40 feet across and spreading out in weird, uneven shapes. It covered the driveway and spread into the grass on both sides. It looked black in the dark, but we could see the reflections of our headlights bouncing off it like it was glass. You couldn't tell how deep it was just by looking at it. Mike was ahead of me in his Blazer. He didn't even slow down much. He just went for it. The water splashed up around his wheels, and then his tires disappeared into it. The front of his SUV dipped forward like he had hit a ditch. I could tell just by watching that it was deeper than it looked. His wheels were completely underwater for a second. Somehow he made it across without getting stuck. I didn't want to risk it, not in my car. My sedan sat way lower, and the last thing I wanted was to flood my engine or get stuck in the middle with no way out. Of course, the guys in my car started giving me crap immediately, calling me soft, saying I was scared, all that usual junk. It got under my skin, and instead of being smart, I backed up a bit, put the car in drive, and floored it straight through the water. For a second, I felt the resistance of the water drag the car down. It felt like everything was slowing. But somehow, I came out the other side, my heart pounding. It was a dumb decision, but at that age, I didn't care about dumb the way I do now. We parked near Mike's Blazer, both vehicles facing the main building. The lights were still on, idling. We climbed out, slammed the doors, and started looking around. Everything was soaked. The air smelled like oil and rot, and our shoes made squishing sounds with every step. Most of the windows were smashed, and inside the building were twisted staircases, rusted-out control panels, broken desks, and old machinery covered in moss and bird crap. There were a few small rooms that still had paperwork inside, even some tattered hard hats and gloves tossed into corners. No one had cleaned anything up. It had just been left there, frozen in time. We didn't go too deep in. The floors felt soft in some spots, and with all the water and decay, none of us wanted to risk falling through. We just explored the surface level, shined flashlights into the shadows, made jokes, took some pictures. At one point we thought we heard something moving on the upper level, like a scrape or a shuffle, but it could have been an animal or wind. Places like that make you hear things, even if nothing's really there. About an hour passed. It's hard to keep track of time in places like that. You get lost in it. The dark, the silence, the smell. Eventually someone said we should head out, and no one disagreed. We walked back to the cars, our clothes damp, and our shoes covered in mud and weeds. That's when everything got weird. Both cars, mine and Mike's, were now facing the opposite direction, completely turned around. Not moved slightly, not angled different, turned 180 degrees, facing back toward the entrance. For a minute, no one said anything. We just stood there staring. My heart dropped into my stomach. I felt like the breath had been knocked out of me. I reached for my keys automatically, checking my pockets even though I already knew I had them. They'd been there the whole time. There were no spares, and I had locked the car when we walked away. I always did. Everyone else was just as confused. Mike swore up and down that his Blazer was off and locked. I didn't even have a remote for my car, just a key, old school. There was no way we had accidentally bumped it into neutral or something. The parking brake was on. Even if we hadn't, the ground was flat. We would have heard or seen someone messing with the cars. We were just 100 feet away. The only explanation was that someone had turned them around. But who? And why? And how? We checked everything. The doors were still locked. Nothing was stolen. The inside looked untouched. It didn't make any sense. It felt like we had stepped into the middle of something we weren't supposed to see or be part of. Like we had trespassed in a way that had nothing to do with fences or signs. I started the engine, and that's when I realized something else. The water was gone. Gone. Not just lower. Not just drained slightly. Completely gone. The ground where the water had been, where we had driven through only an hour earlier, was now just wet gravel and grass. Still damp, but no puddle. No lake. No evidence that it had been waist-high on our wheels earlier. There weren't even tire tracks or mud trails. It looked like it had never been there. No one said anything for a long while. We just stood there, letting it sink in. Eventually we got in our cars and left. No music. No talking. Just headlights cutting through the dark, following each other back down that narrow road with the trees pressing in from both sides. The next day we talked about it. A lot. We tried to come up with theories. Maybe someone had been there watching us the whole time, waiting for us to go inside. Maybe there were other entrances we didn't know about. Maybe it was workers who still used the area for something unofficial. But none of it explained the water being gone. None of it explained why we didn't hear anything. Why no one saw movement. Why nothing was taken. Why the cars weren't damaged or even slightly disturbed beyond being turned. Over the years, we've told the story dozens of times. At parties, on road trips, whenever the subject of Weird NJ comes up, everyone remembers it the same way. There were 8 or 9 of us that night. We all remember the water, the car turnaround, the silence, the panic. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a joke. We still don't have an answer. There's no twist. No ghost. No shadowy figure in the distance. Just facts. We drove into an abandoned refinery in the middle of the night. There was deep standing water. We explored a building. When we came back, our cars were turned around, and the water was gone. That's it. Sometimes the scariest part of a story is when nothing explains it. No monster. No killer. Just a gap in logic that never fills. A moment where the world stops following rules for just long enough to leave you wondering what else might be possible. I haven't gone back. None of us have. We never even talked about doing it again. Some things just don't feel worth poking at. You don't need to see something chasing you through the woods to know you're not wanted somewhere. Sometimes the silence says enough. I grew up in one of those towns where kids just did whatever they wanted. Not in a bad way, not like we were criminals or running wild, but more like it was just safe. Parents didn't really worry. We didn't have much crime, and the streets were familiar. Everyone sort of knew everyone, and that included the kids. Most of my afternoons after school were spent riding bikes, walking the back roads, cutting across fields, climbing fences, and ending up at someone's house for dinner before heading home when the streetlights came on. I spent most of my time with my best friend, Jonah. We'd known each other since we were toddlers. His house was 2 blocks away from mine, and we had that kind of unspoken agreement that we were hanging out every day unless one of us was sick or grounded. He had this old dog named Buddy, a golden retriever who was getting up there in years, but still had that playful, loyal energy that made him feel like one of the crew. Buddy was always with us. He followed us everywhere. He'd been with Jonah since we were around 7, and by the time this happened, we were both around 13 or 14. We had this hideout in the woods behind the train tracks, near the far side of town. It had started as just a place we'd go to sit and talk or throw rocks into the creek, but slowly we built it up. 2 years of scavenging boards, tarps, old bricks, cinder blocks, plastic sheets, rope, we turned it into something. It wasn't much really. No walls, just some windbreaks, a fire pit we never lit, a couple of crates to sit on, and a roof made out of tarp and broken umbrella pieces strung up through the trees. But it was ours. We worked on it like other kids built tree houses. We buried jars in the dirt with notes in them. We had hidden stashes of snacks, comics, and even a couple of old rusted tools that we had no real use for, but thought were cool. That day was supposed to be just like any other. We planned it all out at lunch. Grab a snack from his place, cut through the back alley, take the path behind the old high school football field, and make it to the woods before the sun dipped too low. It was spring, one of those warm days where the wind still bites a little, but the sun tricks you into thinking it's summer. The dirt path was dry, no mud, and Buddy trotted along ahead of us like he always did, sniffing at branches, chasing nothing, then stopping to wait for us to catch up. We were just coming up the hill that curves along the train tracks, where the tree line starts to thicken, when we saw the guy. He was standing just off the path, maybe 20 feet ahead of us. At first, I wasn't even sure if he was real. He looked like someone who'd been walking for days, with clothes that didn't make sense for the weather. Heavy pants with holes in the knees, a jacket tied around his waist, and a long-sleeved shirt that was more brown than white from dirt. His hair was stuck to his head in greasy, uneven patches, and his skin looked grayish under the dirt. He had a long stick with him, not like a hiking stick, but more like a branch he'd snapped off somewhere. Thick and heavy. He looked around like he was lost or confused. Then, without even looking to see if anyone was nearby, he dropped the stick, squatted, pulled down his pants, and started taking a dump right there. We both gasped. It wasn't even on purpose. It just came out. It was shocking. Not just gross, but surreal. This wasn't a campsite or a park or a random corner. It was a spot we walked through every day, a trail that led to our little world. He must have heard us because he snapped his head around so fast, eyes wide and wild, like he'd just been caught doing something illegal. "What the fuck you looking at?" he barked. I froze. My stomach dropped. Something in his voice wasn't right. It wasn't just embarrassment or anger. There was something behind it, something unpredictable. He stood up, pants still not fully pulled up, and grabbed his stick. Then he ran at us. Jonah yelled, and Buddy started barking like crazy. Instinct kicked in, and I bolted. I didn't even think. My feet just took me straight into the woods, the direction of our hideout. I heard Jonah's footsteps behind me at first, but then I realized he wasn't following me. He had veered off, maybe back toward the road, or maybe into the deeper brush. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I just ran and ran, heart slamming in my chest, branches scratching my arms and legs, until I reached the hideout. I crouched there, panting so hard I thought I might pass out. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unclip the knife I kept in my pocket. Just a little pocket knife, something my dad had given me when I turned 12. I didn't know what I'd even do with it. I sat there for what felt like forever, trying to listen. The wind was rustling the trees, birds chirped like nothing had happened, and the occasional creak of a branch made me flinch. Time seemed to stretch. I kept trying to convince myself Jonah had outrun the guy and was making his way back to me, but minutes kept ticking by. Eventually, my breathing slowed, and the shaking dulled to a tremor. I knew I couldn't just sit there forever. I had to go find Jonah. He was probably hiding, too, just in a different spot. I left the hideout slowly, ears straining for any sound. Every squirrel made my heart jump. I followed the trail I thought Jonah would have taken. He always liked to duck down near the creek bend, under this one dead tree that had fallen like a bridge over the water. I called his name once. Quietly. Nothing. I moved closer. That's when I saw him. He was crouched down behind a bush, hands pressed into the dirt. I called out again, a little louder, and he looked up. His face was pale, eyes red, and both of his hands were covered in blood. Not just spots or smears, completely drenched. I ran to him, heart jumping into my throat, and started asking him if he was hurt, if he was okay. I checked his arms, his shirt. Nothing. No wounds. He didn't talk, just shook his head. Then he pointed. About 10 feet from where he was crouching, I saw the dog, or what was left of him. At first, I didn't even realize what I was looking at. The shape was wrong. I saw fur, but it was matted down and streaked with red. Then I saw the limbs, twisted in unnatural angles. The body was torn open. I couldn't move. I just stared. The dog didn't look like a dog anymore. It looked like something had tried to destroy him completely. His skull was caved in. Blood was pooled in the leaves around him, soaking into the dirt. Bits of bone and something pink, his organs maybe, were sticking out. It looked like the man hadn't just hit Buddy to stop him. He had kept going. He had kept hitting him over and over and over. I finally turned back to Jonah. He looked like he was going to throw up. His hands were shaking worse than mine were earlier. He couldn't talk. He just stared at the mess like his brain had shut off. I didn't know what else to do. I told him we had to go, that we had to tell someone. I helped him up, and he just followed me. No words, no noise. He walked like a sleepwalker, his bloody hands hanging at his sides. When we got to his house, his mom was outside watering plants. She saw us coming and froze when she saw Jonah's hands. She started asking questions fast. What happened? Are you hurt? Where's the dog? But Jonah didn't answer. I did. I had to. I told her what happened from the start. About the man, about how he chased us, about how we split up. About Buddy. I didn't go into detail. I couldn't. She ran inside to call the police, and I just stood there on the front lawn while Jonah went inside and sat on the stairs. He didn't even wash his hands. The cops came about 20 minutes later. I told them the whole thing again. Jonah still couldn't speak. He just stared at the floor. His mom had to wrap his hands in towels to keep the blood from getting everywhere. They took us back to the woods in their car, showed them where we saw the guy, where it all happened. They found the scene. One of the officers threw up when he saw the dog. They searched the whole area for the man. For days. Brought dogs, put out bulletins, asked around town. Nothing. No one had seen anyone like that. No one matching the description. The best guess they gave us was that he was a drifter, maybe mentally ill, just wandering through. A bum, they said. A crazy bum. But I always remembered how deliberate he looked. How he kept hitting Buddy even after it was over. That wasn't just some outburst. That was something else. Jonah didn't come back to school for over a week. And even when he did, he was quiet. Different. He didn't smile as much. He didn't laugh. He couldn't talk about Buddy for a long, long time. It wasn't until years later that he told anyone else what happened. Even then, he left out most of the details. I still think about that day more often than I'd like to admit. We had always thought those woods were safe. That we were safe. Just two kids and a dog, building something stupid in the trees. After that, we never went back to the hideout. We left it there. Let the woods take it back. I still live in the same town. I pass that path sometimes when I'm driving. It looks smaller now, overgrown in places, like it's trying to erase what happened. But it's there. I see it, even if no one else does. And every time I do, I remember Buddy. I remember Jonah's hands. And I remember that no matter how safe a place feels, it only takes one person, one bad moment, to ruin it forever. I must have been around 8 or 9 when I moved into the downstairs rumpus room of our house. At the time, I felt proud of the independence. It was a spacious area, more like a second living room than a proper bedroom, and the idea of having that entire lower part of the house to myself felt like freedom. My siblings' bedrooms were upstairs near our parents', while I had a whole floor to stretch out in. I had a little desk in one corner, my toys and bins stacked beside the sliding doors to the garden, and my bed along the far wall beneath 2 narrow windows. There was even a bathroom down there, which added to the sense that I had my own place. But at night, the space felt very different. The ceiling lights cast dim yellow patches across the concrete floor, and the far corners of the room always seemed darker than they should have been. The rumpus room had this stale, heavy smell. Maybe it was from the carpet, or maybe it was from being underground. The air never felt like it moved properly. Sometimes the wind outside would rattle the garden doors or hiss through the gap under the stairs, and I'd lie in bed wondering how something as light as air could feel so heavy. My dad had given me his old hi-fi stereo, a bulky black unit with separate components, amp, CD tray, equalizer, and glowing green LEDs across the front. It sat on a low shelf near my bed. He told me it would help me sleep if I played music quietly. Every night before bed, I'd pick out one of the CDs from the wire rack. Some were his, some were mine, and set it to play low enough to barely hear, like background hum. I had a few favorite discs. Sometimes it was Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here, sometimes The Stranglers, or one of the instrumental CDs with long, moody tracks. It helped, or at least I thought it did. The first night, I remember something strange happening. I woke up in the middle of the night with the music off. That wasn't too unusual. Some of the CDs ended after 40 or 50 minutes. But what caught my eye was the stereo itself. The little LED lights on the amplifier were still on. That wasn't strange in itself. They stayed on unless I turned the unit off. But that night, they were flickering. Not just flickering like a loose cable or a dying bulb, but in a kind of pattern, like someone tapping a rhythm out of sync. Two lights would blink quickly, then one would pulse long and slow. Then all of them would go still for a moment before starting again. I sat up in bed, bleary-eyed, not really sure if I was still dreaming or if I was awake. The rest of the room looked the same. Shadows hung on the walls where my furniture stood. The narrow windows showed nothing but dark. I rubbed my eyes and got out of bed to walk over to the stereo. As soon as I stepped onto the carpet, I felt it, this strange buzzing through the soles of my feet. Like when your foot falls asleep, that prickly numbness, but all over my body. It wasn't painful, just disorienting. It felt like something inside me was vibrating, like my whole nervous system was being tuned by some invisible signal. My hands trembled, and my hair stood straight up on my arms and neck. I reached for the stereo's power button, but my fingers felt weak and numb. The lights blinked again, 3 fast, 1 long, and then everything around me felt quiet, even though I could still hear the low hum of electricity from the amp. I stepped back, still half in a daze. My legs barely moved like they should have, as though gravity itself had changed and I had to drag them. I remember thinking I was in a dream, or at least something like it. The edges of the room felt too sharp. The air was too still. I crawled back into bed and lay under the covers, trying to make sense of what was happening. That was when the static started. It wasn't coming from the speakers, at least not directly. It was in the air itself, or maybe in my head. A high, dry buzz like TV static, but smoother, more spread out. It didn't sound like it had a single source. It was everywhere at once, like I was inside of it. The noise didn't rise or fall, it just existed. Heavy and steady and absolute. Along with it came a feeling. Not fear exactly, but something darker. Something that felt like a presence. There wasn't anything in the room. I didn't see a shape or a shadow moving, but I felt something. It was like someone was watching me without eyes. Like the room had become aware of me and decided to press itself against me. The weight of it settled in the air above the bed, not visible but dense, like smoke without form. I froze. I didn't move, didn't blink. My breath slowed, and I made a conscious effort not to do anything that might trigger, whatever it was. My instinct told me I wasn't in danger, but that I shouldn't challenge it either. So I played dead. I kept my eyes barely open, just enough to see the faint glow of the stereo lights still pulsing across the room. I told myself over and over, stay still, don't react. I lay there like that until I eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, everything was normal. The stereo was still on. The CD had finished playing. The lights were steady. No trace of anything weird. I told myself it was a dream. A weird one, sure, but just a dream. Kids have those. The downstairs room made things feel off sometimes. That was probably all it was. But then it happened again. And again. For weeks. Not every night, but most. It was always the same. I'd wake up, lights flickering, music off, static rising through my body, presence in the room. Sometimes it was stronger than others. Some nights the buzzing would start before I even opened my eyes. I'd know before I was fully awake that it was happening again. The feeling of weight in the air, that strange paralysis in my limbs, and the pressure in my chest like something was pressing down without touching me. I never told anyone. What was I going to say? That my dad's stereo was transmitting some kind of invisible pressure that made me feel like a human antenna? That a sound I couldn't quite hear was putting me into a trance and filling the room with something I couldn't see? I didn't even feel scared most of the time, just confused. There was something intelligent about it, but not in a human way. Not malicious, but not kind either. Like it was aware of me and interested, but indifferent. I started keeping the stereo off, thinking that might help, but it didn't. Some nights, I'd fall asleep with no music and still wake up to the lights blinking, still wake to the static in my bones and that strange pressure filling the room. I began to notice little things during the day too. My skin would feel sensitive for hours after waking up, like I'd walked through a field of static cling. My muscles felt tired, like I'd been holding a position all night. And mentally, I started having these strange pauses in my thoughts, like walking into a room and forgetting why you were there, but constantly. I'd be halfway through a sentence and just stop, feeling like something was misaligned in the back of my mind. One morning, I remember lying in bed staring at the ceiling long after the sun had come up. I hadn't slept much. The night had been one of the worst ones. Intense buzzing, the presence felt thicker, heavier, almost annoyed. And I lay there, listening to the sounds of my family getting ready upstairs, and I thought, maybe this room wasn't meant to be lived in. Maybe it wasn't designed for people to sleep in it. Not because it was haunted or cursed, but because there was something in it, something in the materials, in the walls, in the wiring, that didn't mix well with people. I started sleeping with the door open, hoping the hallway light or the sounds from upstairs might help. Sometimes I brought a flashlight to bed and kept it on. I even unplugged the stereo and moved it to the far corner of the room. Still, the dreams came. Still, the sensations returned. Eventually, it became so normal that I didn't even react much. I'd just lie still, wait it out, and drift back to sleep. It became part of the rhythm of my nights. Wake up, endure, sleep. And then one night, it stopped. I remember that morning clearly. I woke up naturally, no buzzing, no paralysis, no flickering lights. The stereo was off, everything was still. The air in the room felt lighter. I thought maybe I'd grown out of it. Maybe whatever part of my brain had been interpreting normal sensations in strange ways had finally reset. I didn't have that dream again after that. Not even once. I kept the stereo unplugged, just in case, but the sense of presence never returned. The static never returned. I slept normally, like a regular kid, for the rest of the time I lived in that house. Years later, I brought it up in passing to my dad. I asked him if the stereo had ever done anything weird for him. Lights flickering, strange buzzing. He shrugged and said no, but added something that stuck with me. That amp had a weird ground loop once. I had to get a new cable to fix it. Used to send this weird hum through the speakers if you didn't plug it into the wall the right way. It explained the flickering, maybe even the hum, but it didn't explain the rest. Not the feeling in my body, not the presence in the room, not how every hair on my body felt charged and alert, or how the air itself had felt like it was pushing against me. I've never had that sensation again, not even close. But sometimes when I pass through a certain kind of silence, or walk into a room with old electronics, or when I hear that faint buzz that sometimes lives in the background of modern life, I remember it. That pressure in the air, that stillness, that invisible something sitting just beyond what we can see. I still don't know what it was, and I still don't think it wanted to hurt me, but I know it was there. I was in the third year of medical school when I started my OB/GYN rotation. That week, I was scheduled on the labor and delivery floor at the teaching hospital we rotated through, which was a bit of a chaotic place. It was one of those older hospitals, clean enough, but you could feel the years in the peeling paint on the ceiling tiles and the worn-down linoleum floors that always squeaked under your shoes no matter how softly you walked. Most of the nurses knew what they were doing and had seen everything, but sometimes things just felt off there. Maybe it was just me, but certain days had this heaviness to them. That week, I had been pulling 12-hour shifts and was crashing on a friend's couch close to the hospital to save myself the commute home. I was running on caffeine, vending machine granola bars, and a very thin layer of sleep that barely kept me functional. I think that's why the dream I had the night before stood out to me so sharply. Usually when I dreamed, they were flashes, disconnected, shapeless. But this one was different. Vivid. It felt linear, clear, almost too real. In the dream, I was standing in a delivery room, same as always, and I was helping deliver a baby. But in the dream, I remember hearing someone say the baby's name before it was even out. Sunny. Not like a nickname, just clear, deliberate. Sunny. The light in the dream was bright, like the real hospitals, but warmer. I remember the moment I pulled the baby out, her face glowing, almost as if there were sunlight behind her skin. It was the only comforting thing about that dream. Everything else, the silence in the room, the strange way the nurses had stood back with their arms crossed, the weird whirring sound near my ear, had made me uneasy even before I woke up. I wrote it off. Medical students don't get to have feelings. You just keep showing up. The next day I was on the floor again, working with a second-year resident. She was sharp, no nonsense, always moving fast. I was trying to keep up and take notes while assisting with intake paperwork for patients coming into triage. That's when they came in, a young couple, maybe early 30s, the woman visibly pregnant but calm, walking slowly next to her husband. Her contractions weren't intense yet, but they were close enough together that she had been told to come in. Her chart said she was at 39 weeks, no major complications during pregnancy, 2 prior full-term deliveries. We got her situated in one of the delivery rooms. It was one of the nicer ones with a window that overlooked a small garden that no one actually used. I don't even think you could get to it from inside the hospital. While the nurse was finishing up vitals and we were doing our usual questioning, I asked something just to make conversation, as we usually did to calm patients down. I asked if they'd picked out a name. The mother looked at the father and smiled. He said, kind of shyly, Astra. He spelled it for me, Astra. Said it meant star in some language, maybe Persian, maybe some old European name. I couldn't remember now. I remember pausing just a little too long. I didn't say anything about the dream. I didn't want to sound weird, but it made me uneasy. Star. Sunny. Something about that naming connection sat in my chest like a stone. I'd heard people say before that sometimes we pick up things in our subconscious and they come out in dreams, but I hadn't read any charts with that name, hadn't seen anything like it before. And the weird thing was, when I glanced at the intake form again, I noticed that their other kids had names that were also a little unusual. I can't remember them exactly now, but one had something to do with the moon, and the other sounded like a constellation or a planet. It just gave the whole thing this weird cosmic vibe that didn't sit right with me. But again, I pushed it down. You can't walk around a hospital acting like names are omens. The labor progressed slowly through the day. The mother was doing fine, stoic, calm, breathing through the contractions without much complaint. The husband sat in the corner for most of it, nervously tapping his knee, scrolling on his phone, getting up now and then to help her drink water or hold her hand. At around 7 centimeters, the contractions started getting harder and closer together. The resident and I stayed nearby, checking on her every 30 minutes or so. Around midnight, the attending, the actual OB-GYN assigned to her, still hadn't shown up, but that wasn't unusual. They usually came in closer to delivery, unless there was something high risk. The resident and I began prepping everything once the patient hit 10 centimeters. It was just the 2 of us in the room at that point, along with the nurse. I remember the room being quiet. No music playing, just the sound of the fetal heart monitor thudding steadily, and the deep breathing of the mother as she began pushing. The lights above the bed were bright and clinical, casting harsh shadows on the walls. The whole room had this concentrated energy, like we were standing in the center of a storm, and outside everything was still. Just before the baby crowned, the door swung open and the attending finally walked in. He was a tall guy, maybe in his 50s, always rode his bike to work. Wore those kind of reflective bike pants over his scrubs. He looked flustered, a little sweaty, and was apologizing as he came in. Said the ride-in took longer than expected because he'd hit some construction or something. We didn't ask questions. There was no time. He tossed his backpack on the counter, snapped on gloves, and took position right at the end of the bed. That's when I noticed it. As he bent down to get ready, I saw these small, dark specks moving on the back of his head, right around the lower part of his skull, near the occipital ridge. At first, I thought maybe it was blood or dirt, maybe dried leaves. But when he shifted under the light, I saw clearly there were insects, like gnats or some kind of tiny fly-like bugs crawling in and out of his hair, grouped in a wet cluster. I felt my stomach twist. It was one of those moments where your brain tries to make sense of something, but comes up empty. The resident noticed it at the same time. She looked at me, then at him, and I could see this flash of confusion in her eyes. Without really thinking, she reached forward, half gagging, and said something like, "You've got something on your head." She tried to brush them out with her gloved hand, and he just laughed and said, "Oh yeah," biked through a swarm of them. His voice was too casual, like it didn't register how disturbing it was. And then, right then, the baby came out. The room went very still. The mother didn't scream. She just gave one long push, and the baby slid out into the attending's gloved hands. But the moment it happened, I knew something was wrong. You can feel it in the air, the way everyone in the room stops moving at the same time. No crying yet. And when I stepped forward and saw the baby's face, my breath caught in my throat. The baby was small. Not just newborn small, microcephalic. Her head was abnormally shaped, with a flat depression in the skull that lined up almost exactly with where those bugs had been crawling on the doctor's own head. There was a dark, reddish-purple stain across one side of her face, stretching from her temple to her cheek, right against her pale skin. The kind of birthmark that immediately set off alarms in your mind if you'd ever seen a pediatric textbook. We were silent for a few seconds too long. The kind of silence that always follows when something's not right, and no one wants to be the first to say it. The mother asked, "Is she okay?" But no one answered right away. The attending cut the cord. The baby was breathing, but the cry was weak. The nurses moved quickly then, taking her to the warmer, calling pediatrics. The mother kept asking what was going on, her voice getting more panicked. We did our best to reassure her, but none of us said the word. Not yet. Later, after things settled, the diagnosis came in Sturge-Weber syndrome. I had heard of it in lectures. Rare, maybe one in every 20,000 to 50,000 births. A congenital disorder caused by abnormal blood vessels in the skin, brain, and eyes. The red stain was a port wine birthmark, one of the hallmarks. The brain abnormalities explained the skull deformity and microcephaly. The prognosis wasn't good. Most cases had some level of developmental delay, seizures, sometimes severe mental impairment, vision problems. It was the kind of diagnosis that changed a family forever. But none of that hit me as hard as the moment I looked at that baby and remembered the dream. The name, the cosmic naming pattern, the weirdness of the attending's bugs. The soft, glowing face of the baby in my dream had been replaced by something fragile and silent. Not broken, not evil, just faded. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the hospital halls for hours after my shift ended, circling past the nursery, then the exit, then the chapel. I didn't go in. I just stood near the door and stared at the sign. I didn't know what I was looking for. Answers? Meaning? Maybe I just needed to feel like someone else had noticed it too, like someone else could see how strange and wrong it all felt. A few days later, I saw the attending again. His head was shaved. I didn't ask why. The bugs were gone. Maybe they'd never been there in the way I thought. But I'll never forget the way they moved, the way they clung to that part of his head like they belonged there. Sometimes I wonder if there really is something about naming, about patterns, about dreams that feel too sharp to be coincidence. But medicine doesn't have a place for that. We call it randomness, genetic mutation, prenatal vascular anomaly. But I still remember the dream. I still remember the name. I still remember the weight in my chest as I stood in that room and watched her take her first breath. And I still feel sick, even now, whenever I think about the way those bugs moved on his head. Back when I was serving in the Army, there were a lot of strange things that happened, but one in particular stuck with me. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It wasn't even the kind of thing that would make headlines or be told around a campfire to scare new recruits. But it was unsettling in a way that never really left me, even years later. It happened on base, during what should have been a routine evening. I was stationed with a company of around 30 other guys, and we lived in an old two-story barracks that had been around for decades. It wasn't fancy or anything, just long rows of metal-framed beds, old lockers along the wall, dusty floors that never seemed clean no matter how much we swept, and ceiling fans that creaked constantly but didn't do much to fight the heat. The bathrooms were down the hall and smelled like bleach and mildew mixed together. This all happened during one of the quieter stretches of service, when we were just on base doing maintenance and training. The day it started, everything was going on as usual. We were going through the motions, training, cleaning, polishing boots, following orders. Nothing out of the ordinary. By the time dinner came around, most of us were tired and just looking forward to sitting down in the mess hall. You'd be surprised how much you start looking forward to those bland army meals after long hours in the heat. So we're all eating, sitting at those long aluminum tables under the buzzing white lights, when one of the officers comes stomping through the mess. His boots echo loud against the concrete floor. Everyone straightens up just a little, forks paused midair. He doesn't say anything, just walks right past us with this tight look on his face. That wasn't normal. It turns out, before coming into the mess hall, he had done a sweep through our bunk area. Standard procedure sometimes, especially if they suspect someone's broken rules. Our lockers were supposed to be unlocked and empty unless it was the one we were currently assigned to. Most of them had nothing in them at all, just metal frames collecting dust. But apparently, he found a sandwich tucked inside one of the lockers. It was a simple thing, a sandwich, but it was enough to set off a chain reaction that turned the rest of the night into something I still don't really understand. Food wasn't allowed in the barracks, not ever. We'd been warned about pests and discipline standards and hygiene. It wasn't like someone could claim they didn't know. It was drilled into us from day one. And the fact that it was hidden in a supposedly empty locker made it even more suspicious. The officer didn't say anything during dinner. He let us eat in peace, and I honestly thought nothing of it until we got back and were told to fall in outside. Everyone who had a bed in that particular bunk, about a dozen guys, was ordered to do PT until they were practically falling over. Push-ups, sit-ups, sprints, burpees, you name it. They were drenched in sweat, red-faced, and breathing hard by the time they were finally allowed to stop. Then they went back inside, still furious, and it didn't take long before we heard shouting from the window. Someone accused someone else of being the one who put the sandwich there. Another guy denied it and said he had nothing to do with it. Pretty soon, it got loud enough that one of the corporals had to step in and break it up. When things settled down, they agreed that no one would take the blame. No one fessed up, and the sandwich was eventually tossed in the trash. Everyone made a show of locking their own lockers. Then they locked the entire bunk and headed off to last parade like they were supposed to. By then, most of us had heard the story. It was a point of gossip. Who would be dumb enough to stash a sandwich? Why hide it in an empty locker of all places? The fact that no one admitted it made it weird, sure, but stuff like that happens in the army. People do stupid things and then refuse to own up to it. You get used to it. But it was what happened next that made it stick with me. After last parade, when everyone was free to go back to their bunks and shower, and maybe write letters or talk, or just rest, a group of us ended up heading back to that same bunk. I was there because one of my close buddies was staying in it, and I wanted to borrow something from him. Everyone was already buzzing about the sandwich thing. You could feel the energy in the air, jokes, teasing, and a bit of tension still left over from earlier. Guys were making sarcastic remarks about ghosts and curses, just blowing off steam. One guy, I remember this clearly, laughed and said something along the lines of, "If it was a ghost, maybe it can put a sandwich in my locker too." They unlocked the bunk and went in, switching on the overhead lights. The room flickered for a second, the way it always did when the ancient wiring struggled to come to life, and then the dull yellow light filled the space. The fans creaked overhead, and everything looked exactly the same as they'd left it. They all moved toward the lockers, some still talking and laughing. The guy who'd made the joke earlier stepped forward to unlock his own locker. He fished out the key, twisted it in the rusty lock, and pulled it open. And there it was, another sandwich, sitting dead center on the metal shelf, wrapped up in a napkin, just like the first one. Everyone went silent, dead quiet, not even the usual smart comments or laughter. Just that hum of the ceiling fans and the ticking sound of the light above. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Not from fear exactly, but from something deeper, something uncomfortable. The guy who found it just stood there for a second. He didn't touch it. He didn't even move, like he was trying to process what he was looking at. The napkin was the same type as the mess hall used. The sandwich itself looked fresh. White bread, something meaty inside, maybe turkey or ham. It wasn't moldy or old. There was no way anyone had time to sneak it in there. The bunk had been locked. The lockers had been locked. Everything had been double-checked, and we were all at last parade the whole time. The guy finally closed the locker and sat down on his bed. He didn't say anything, just sat there staring at the floor. A few others tried to laugh it off. They said maybe someone had stayed behind and done it, though everyone had been accounted for. They said maybe the guy was just trying to prank the rest of us by hiding it there himself. But no one really believed it. Not after seeing his face. No one took the sandwich out this time. It just stayed there, locked inside the locker. Eventually, someone mentioned it to one of the corporals, and he came in, checked it out, and left without saying much. The next day, the sandwich was gone. Locker was empty. Nothing ever came of it officially. But the mood changed. That whole bunk was weird for the next week. Guys were quieter. They double-checked their lockers before going anywhere. No more jokes about ghosts. No more late-night teasing. Eventually, we moved on, the way you always do in the army. New tasks, new training, new problems. But I never forgot that night. Not because it was terrifying, but because it was so simple and so unexplainable. I know what people would say. That it was a prank. That someone found a way to get inside and plant the sandwich. And it was all just a joke that got taken too far. But even now, thinking back, I can't figure out how it would have been done. The timing didn't make sense. No one was missing during parade. The locks weren't broken. And the sandwich looked like it had just been made. It was a small thing, but it shook something in me. Not because it was supernatural. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that. But because sometimes things happen that don't line up, and you're left trying to make sense of it in a world that demands logic. And when you can't find the logic, it sticks with you. It makes you feel like maybe you missed something, like you overlooked some detail. But I never found the answer. None of us did. And that's what made it feel real. It started when I was in 7th grade. I was still limping a little back then, not that anyone really noticed. I'd had surgery on my leg, and even though the doctors told me it would heal well, the stiffness in my muscles made me feel like I was dragging someone else's limb behind me. I hated walking between classes. The school building felt like a maze of long corridors and endless staircases, and I always tried to take the quieter routes to avoid people looking at me with either pity or boredom in their eyes. That was how I met him. I won't write his name here, not because I've forgotten it, how could I? But because I want this to be about more than a name. It's about a time, a moment, a person, and the silence that came after. We started talking after gym class. I had sat out again, like always, and he had too. He was different from the others. He had a way of talking that was soft but sharp at the same time. He never asked me about my limp like the others did. Instead, he said something like, "We should get medals for just showing up, huh?" And he pulled up his shirt just a bit to show the bandage on his back. That was the first time I noticed how pale he looked, how his eyes had a kind of tiredness you don't usually see in kids our age. I didn't ask too many questions, but over time, he told me. He'd had several surgeries for a hole in his spine. I didn't even know what that meant at the time, not fully. But I knew it wasn't something small. And I knew the pain in his face when he sat down too quickly or moved too fast. We shared that. Pain. Not always the same kind, but enough to know when the other was pretending to be okay. We got close fast. Faster than I think either of us expected. We shared everything. Stories from home, things that annoyed us, funny observations about our classmates. We'd sometimes skip lunch and just sit on the side stairs near the back of the school and laugh about things nobody else would even understand. We weren't loud kids. We weren't the kind to stand out. But with each other, it felt like we could finally breathe. He helped me carry my bag when my leg hurt too much. I covered for him when he needed to lie down in the nurse's office. We started pulling harmless pranks on people. Stupid ones like moving someone's backpack to a different spot or putting ketchup packets under the toilet seat. Nothing mean, just dumb kid stuff. But it made us laugh, and sometimes laughing felt like the only way to keep from sinking into whatever weight we both carried. I told him things I hadn't told anyone, things I still haven't told my parents. There was something about the way he listened, quiet, but always present, like he wasn't just waiting for his turn to talk. He made me feel like what I said mattered. But then 8th grade came, and everything changed. He didn't come back that year. No warning, no goodbye. One day he was just gone. The teachers said he had moved to a different district. I tried not to show how much it bothered me, but it did, more than I admitted. I didn't have a phone number, no email. I didn't even know which town he moved to. For the first few weeks, I kept expecting to see him back. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd pop up in the hallway and tell me it was all a joke. He didn't. I didn't see him again. Not for years. High school came and went in a blur. Ninth grade was just about surviving. I kept to myself more. I made a few friends, but nothing like before. I wasn't looking for that again. Some things don't repeat themselves. 10th grade was better, I guess, but the weight was still there. Not every day, but often enough. Then, near the end of 10th grade, something strange happened. It was a Saturday morning. I remember it clearly because I wasn't even supposed to be awake that early. I always slept in on Saturdays, but that day, something just pulled me out of bed. I didn't feel rested. I didn't feel energetic. But I felt unsettled, like I needed to move. Not in a restless way, more like something was pulling me towards something else. I didn't overthink it. I just got dressed and went outside. I walked. That was all. Just walked. There's a park near my neighborhood, not too big, but enough space to feel quiet. I ended up going that way without really deciding to. I hadn't been there in weeks. As I neared the path that leads around the swing sets, I saw someone sitting on the low stone wall near the drinking fountain. It was him. I stopped walking for a second, almost thinking I was dreaming. He was older now, like me. A little thinner. But it was him. Same face, same eyes. Same small scar on his left cheek he got from falling off his bike in 7th grade. We didn't make a scene. We didn't yell or run to hug each other like in movies. We just sort of stood there, frozen for a second, then slowly walked toward each other. I remember smiling. Not a big grin, just something small. Like something inside me had finally clicked into place again. He told me he was in the area to pay bills for his mom. Said he didn't even plan to be near the park, but decided to walk through on a whim. We sat on the wall and talked for hours. It didn't feel like years had passed. We picked up right where we left off, like time had folded in on itself. We talked about everything, school, our surgeries, the pain that still came and went, the changes in our families, the people we no longer spoke to. He laughed when I told him some dumb thing I did in science class. And I laughed when he told me about a time he got caught sneaking out of the house. For a few hours, the world felt simple again. Like we were back in 7th grade, on the side stairs of the school, forgetting about everything else. We didn't exchange numbers. I don't even know why. Maybe it felt too fragile. Maybe we both assumed we'd see each other again soon. I don't know. I just remember how light I felt walking home, like something heavy had finally been lifted. Then the next day came. It was evening when I got the call. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. I barely remember the exact words. All I remember is the sound of his mom's voice, calm but shaking. She told me he'd been in a bike accident, a friend's bike, a truck. I don't know the full details, and I don't think I ever want to. He was taken to the hospital, unconscious, in a coma. 3 days later, he passed away. I don't think I cried at first. I just sat there, holding the phone, listening to the silence on the other end. It felt like the world had paused. His mom told me something else, something I think about all the time. Before he left the house that day, the day he had the accident, he searched every corner of their home looking for a book he had borrowed from me years ago. She didn't know what book. She only knew that he was determined to find it. Said he didn't want to see me without returning it. I don't remember what book it was. I've thought about it for hours, days. I've searched my shelves. Nothing. Maybe it was something small. Maybe it didn't matter. But it mattered to him. The memory of that walk haunts me more than anything. The way I just woke up and walked out the door. The way he just happened to be at that park, at that time, on that day. We hadn't spoken in years. No messages. No calls. No visits. And the day before his accident, we met. We talked. We laughed. Like the universe gave us one last afternoon. Some people have tried to explain it to me. Coincidence, they say. Just a strange, sad twist of fate. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like something I was supposed to be part of. I don't have the words for it, but I carry it. I haven't driven since. I never even learned properly. Every time I see a bike, especially one without a rider, my chest tightens. People joke about it sometimes, say I'm being dramatic. But they don't know. They weren't there. They didn't see his face on that bench. They didn't hear his mom's voice telling me about that book. Grief doesn't always come in waves. Sometimes it just lingers, like smoke that never clears. I still dream about that walk. Not a nightmare. Not something twisted or terrifying. Just that quiet moment, the park, the bench, the breeze through the trees. The sound of him laughing at one of my dumb jokes. That's what haunts me. Not fear. Not pain, just how close we were to something real, something full of life. And then how quickly it was gone. I keep thinking that maybe, in some small way, that day was a gift. One last chance. One final piece of the story before the book closed. And even if I never find that book again, or remember which one it was, I'll always remember the boy who tried to return it. Not because he owed me anything, but because he remembered. I was about 10 years old the first time I heard it. The house was silent except for the muffled noise coming from the TV downstairs. I had the volume turned up just loud enough to keep the empty feeling of the house at bay. I was curled up on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me, a bowl of cereal in my lap. It was a weekend night, probably a Friday or Saturday, because my mom wasn't home. She spent most weekends at her boyfriend's place back then. I didn't hate him, but I didn't like him either. I never really got the chance to. He was loud, drank too much, and always acted like he was joking even when he wasn't. But mostly, he just took my mom away. I'd gotten used to being alone. That night, I was halfway through a rerun of some comedy show when I heard it. A soft thump, followed by the sound of something shifting weight. It wasn't heavy, not like a person stomping around, but more like someone slowly walking in socks. I muted the TV. There it was again. A shuffle, a scratching sound. It was coming from above me, on the roof. I sat there frozen for a moment, staring at the ceiling like I could see through it. The noise continued, a few more careful steps, then silence. I grabbed the house phone and dialed my mom. My hands were shaking. She answered, slurring slightly, and I told her someone was on the roof. I didn't try to sound brave. I was scared, and I let it show. She sighed and said it was probably the wind or the house settling. Maybe a squirrel. She told me to turn the TV up and stop letting my imagination run wild. I hung up, disappointed but not surprised. I tried to do what she said. I turned the volume up and went back to my cereal, but I couldn't stop listening. The footsteps had stopped, but now every creak of the house made my heart jump. That was the beginning of it. Over the next few weeks, it happened again. Always when I was alone, always at night. I'd be reading or watching TV or trying to fall asleep, and I'd hear it, the same careful movement, the faint scratch of claws or maybe nails, the dull thump of something landing or shifting its weight. Sometimes it sounded like it was walking in circles. Other times, it just sat there for what felt like hours. I could almost feel it up there, waiting. I told my mom every time. She always brushed it off. One time she even laughed and said I was just going stir crazy from being home alone so much. After a while, I stopped telling her. What was the point? She didn't believe me. No one did. But I wasn't making it up. Eventually, I got used to it. Kind of. I still hated it, but I knew what to expect. I'd hear the sounds, feel that tight knot in my stomach, then spend the rest of the night jumping at every creak and shadow. I kept a flashlight beside my bed, even when I wasn't supposed to. My cat started sleeping with me every night, something he'd never done before. He'd sit on the windowsill and stare up at the ceiling, ears twitching. It went on like that for months. It became part of my routine. Then one night, something changed. It was a rare night when my mom was home. She was in her room downstairs, watching TV with her boyfriend. I was upstairs in my room, doing homework. It was quiet, the kind of still quiet that only happens when everyone is focused on their own thing. That's when I heard it again. This time, it was louder. Not just a single step or shuffle, but a dragging sound. Something heavy was moving across the roof. I froze, pencil in hand. The sound moved from one side of the house to the other, then stopped above my room. And then I heard it, a deep, low thump. Something had dropped down right above me. I grabbed my flashlight and went into the hallway. My heart was beating so loud I could barely hear. I went downstairs, trying to be quiet, and found my mom and her boyfriend still watching TV. I asked them if they heard anything. At first, they both looked at me like I was bothering them, but then she tilted her head and said, "Wait, be quiet." The three of us stood there. The TV was paused, and the house was dead silent. Then we heard it. Just one step, but it was enough. My mom's boyfriend stood up, squinting toward the ceiling. "That's not the house settling," he said. My mom nodded slowly. I could see her eyes shifting, working through possibilities. She didn't say anything, just grabbed her phone and walked toward the kitchen. Eventually, we went up to check the attic and found nothing. No droppings, no broken boards, nothing. It was clean. Still, she called an exterminator the next day. He looked things over and said it was probably a rodent, maybe a raccoon. They get into weird places sometimes, he said. My mom seemed satisfied with that explanation. We set up traps. First it was mouse traps. We put peanut butter on them, the good kind too, the stuff we kept hidden in the back of the pantry. The next morning, the traps were gone. Not snapped, not tripped, gone. We checked the attic, the crawl space, even the chimney. Nothing. So we stepped it up to rat traps. Big metal, heavy-duty things that could snap a pencil in half. We baited them, set them in the attic, the eaves, the roof access panels. Same thing happened. Next morning, gone. At this point, my mom's boyfriend got involved. He was a taxidermist, so he had access to more creative solutions. He brought home a small animal trap, the kind that could snap a raccoon's leg clean off. We baited it and set it on the roof, anchoring it with wire and bricks. I remember him saying, "If it gets this one, then it's smarter than it looks." It got it, and it left the trap completely untouched, bait gone, mechanism untouched. It didn't even trip the wire. We tried humane box traps too. Same deal. It cleaned them out every time. Not even a hair left behind. Eventually, we found the entry point, a hole beneath one of the loose shingles, hidden under a section of overhanging gutter. It looked like it had been chewed out. There were scratch marks around it, and inside, you could see where something had pushed insulation aside and hollowed out a little space. We patched the hole with steel mesh, nailed down every loose board, sealed everything up tight. Weeks went by. No sounds. No movement. I finally slept through the night again without that tight feeling in my stomach. But then the thunder came. It was a late summer storm, the kind that lights up the sky and rattles the windows. The rain pounded the roof, and lightning lit up the sky every few seconds. I was in bed, trying to sleep, when I noticed my cat sitting on the windowsill again. He wasn't just sitting, though. He was locked in place, staring up at the ceiling, tail flicking. I sat up and looked where he was looking. A second later, I heard it again. Scratching. Fast this time. Desperate. Something was trying to get out. I ran downstairs and found my mom's boyfriend in the kitchen. He'd been drinking, as usual. A bottle of Jack Daniels on the table, red-faced and grinning. I told him it was back. He didn't say much. Just grabbed a flashlight, a bat, and a pouch of chewing tobacco. He popped the screen off the upstairs window and climbed onto the roof like it was nothing. I watched from inside as he crept across the shingles, bottle in one hand, bat in the other. Then he froze. His flashlight landed on something. I couldn't see it clearly from where I was, but I saw the beam catch on a pair of eyes. They were glowing in the light. Wide, round, intelligent. It wasn't scared. It just stared at him. He stood there for a long time, then slowly backed down and came inside. He was pale now, the grin gone. He didn't say much that night. But the next day, he showed us a picture he'd taken on his phone. It was blurry, but you could make out the shape of a raccoon. Not just any raccoon. It was huge, with a thick body, long claws, and black rings around its eyes that made it look like it was wearing a mask. A perfectly fitting mask. That was what he'd seen. We set out traps again. Real ones this time. Bolted down cages with live bait, cameras, everything. And eventually we caught it. It was the biggest raccoon I'd ever seen. Almost the size of a medium-sized dog. It didn't hiss or growl. It just stared. Calm, quiet, like it had already figured everything out and was waiting for us to realize it too. My mom's boyfriend handled it. He didn't say how, but I know it didn't survive. After that, the noises stopped. The ceiling went quiet. My cat went back to sleeping on the couch. Life returned to normal, or at least as normal as it had ever been. Months passed. Then one day, I was coming home from school, heading up to my room. I noticed something strange right away. The light in my room was off. I always left my light on. Always. I was that kind of kid, forgetful, lazy with switches. I flipped the light on. There it was, sitting on my desk like it belonged there, a raccoon. Not a live one, a taxidermied one. Perfectly posed, with one paw resting on a stack of books and its glass eyes staring out like it was watching the room. The fur was clean, the mask still dark around its eyes. It was the same raccoon, the one that had terrorized me for nearly a year, the one no one believed in. I stood there frozen. Then I heard laughter from downstairs. My mom and her boyfriend. They thought it was hilarious. He had preserved it, turned it into a joke, a trophy. He'd even added a little brass tag that said Phantom of the Attic. For some reason, I didn't throw it out. I kept that raccoon for years. It followed me from house to house, always sitting on a shelf or desk. People would ask about it, and I'd just shrug or make something up. But the truth stuck with me. That thing had lived with me, walked above me, watched me sleep. When I moved out of my apartment a few years later, I gave it to the neighbor kids. They were thrilled to have it. They didn't care where it came from or what it meant. Just thought it was cool. They don't know the story. Maybe it's better that way. I still remember the light outside that day, gray, heavy, and slow. I must have been around 7 or 8, still small enough that the world felt too big when I was alone in it. I woke up in my room like I usually did on weekends, tangled in the blankets, kind of half aware of the sounds of the house. But there weren't any sounds that morning. None. That was the first thing that really got to me. Normally, I could hear my mom making noise in the kitchen or walking around the upstairs hall. She worked nights, but even when she was exhausted, she'd at least be in her room asleep, and I'd hear her coughing or the floor creaking. My dad was usually already gone by the time I got up. He left early for work, often before sunrise. That part made sense. But the real quiet came from my brother's rooms. Lucas and Rory always slept in late, especially on weekends. I'd usually hear their music playing, or one of them would be yelling at a video game, or just stomping around when they got up to pee. But the house was silent. Completely, painfully silent. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured I had just gotten up earlier than usual. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and walked down to the kitchen. There wasn't any food on the counter, no breakfast in the works, no lights turned on. I called out for my mom, then for Lucas and Rory. Nothing. I checked every room upstairs. My mom's bed was made, which was weird. She never made it if she was just going to sleep in it again later. Her room didn't feel like she'd been in it at all. Lucas's door was open, which was unusual since he always kept it closed, but the bed was untouched. Same with Rory's room. Everything looked like it had been set up, but no one had used anything. That's when something in my stomach started to feel wrong. Not scared exactly, not yet, but off. Like something had shifted just slightly to the left, and now everything around me was just a little bit wrong. It was so quiet that it didn't even feel like the house was holding its breath. It felt like it had forgotten how to breathe. I went downstairs to the living room and turned on the TV. The static sound of the screen starting up actually startled me. I turned it loud. Then I walked over to the stereo and put in a CD, some random pop mix that my mom used to listen to when she was cleaning. I turned that up too. But the weird thing was, the noise didn't help. It made it worse. The loud music and the bright colors on the TV just made the silence in the rest of the house feel deeper. Like they weren't really touching it. I walked over to the front window, pulled back the curtain, and looked outside. No one. The street looked normal but empty. Even though we lived right across from a small strip mall, there wasn't a single car pulling into the lot, not a person walking on the sidewalk. And the sky, it was so dull. Not raining, not windy. Just this thick, low overcast sky that made everything feel muted and colorless. That's when I started to feel sick. Not like I was going to throw up, but this slow, nauseating unease started building in me. I picked up the cordless phone and called my mom's cell. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I called again, and again. Then I tried my dad's phone. Same thing. I tried Lucas and Rory. Nothing. Nobody picked up. I started going through our house phone's contact list and calling their friends. Nobody answered. I went to the kitchen and opened the fridge, hoping to distract myself. I remember staring inside for a long time, not even hungry, just holding the door open and listening to the hum of the motor. Even that felt too loud. I shut the door, leaned on the counter, and looked at the kitchen window. The backyard was still. The grass wasn't even moving. I stood there for I don't know how long. Then I heard it, whistling. A tune. A slow, deliberate kind of whistling. It wasn't a song I recognized, but it sounded like something out of an old horror movie. The kind of tune someone might whistle while dragging a knife behind them. It was coming from downstairs. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a second. My legs felt heavy, like they were full of wet sand. The whistling went on, slow and calm, for maybe a full minute. Then it stopped. I thought it was over. I almost convinced myself it had been in my head, just stress or nerves or some weird sound from outside. Then I heard laughter. Short, high-pitched, robotic laughter. like one of those old stuffed toys when its battery was dying. Just a single burst of it. Then silence again. I started crying. Not loud sobbing, just silent tears that started running down my face without warning. I picked up the phone again and started calling my mom over and over and over. I remember my fingers shaking as I hit redial. I don't know how many times I called. Probably 20 or more. The music was still playing upstairs, but I couldn't bring myself to go back up there. I grabbed my shoes and went to the front door. My plan was to go across the street to the Shell station. I didn't know what I'd do when I got there, but I needed to see someone, anyone, But just as I turned the doorknob, I heard a voice behind me. My brother, Lucas. He said something like, "Where are you going?" I froze. I turned around slowly. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking at me like I was the one acting weird. He was in his pajamas, his hair all messy like he'd just gotten out of bed. I couldn't speak at first. I was too stunned. He looked completely normal, like nothing was wrong. I asked him where he'd been, and he looked confused. He said he thought he was alone, that he'd been watching TV upstairs and assumed everyone was out. He said he heard the same whistling and laughter and was getting ready to leave too. That's when we both realized we'd been in the same house at the same time and hadn't heard each other at all. I didn't want to stay there another minute. I told him I was going to the Shell, and he followed without saying much else. When we got outside, the air felt weird. Still too quiet, but heavier, like something was hanging in the air. Then we saw Rory walking down the sidewalk from the direction of the school. He looked as out of place as we felt. He said he'd heard the whistling too, from the street. He'd been walking around trying to figure out where it was coming from. But every time he thought he was close, it would move. None of us had a real plan, so we went to the Shell. The guy behind the counter, someone we'd seen 100 times before, was there. But something was off about him. He barely looked at us. No smile, no small talk. He just stood behind the register staring at the lottery ticket display. The bakery next door had people in it too. I saw the bakers we knew, the ones who always gave me free cookies when I was younger. They looked right at us, and then looked away. Didn't wave, didn't say hi. They were working, but it looked forced. Like they were doing it because they had to, not because they were really there. Rory walked into the bar next door, while Lucas and I waited outside. He came out a minute later and said the people inside were talking, laughing, but it felt like they were reading from a script. He said one of the waitresses just stared at him like she didn't recognize him. Even though we'd eaten there dozens of times with our parents, we didn't know what to do. None of us wanted to go back home, so we walked to the school playground, sat on the swings, kicked at the gravel. It was still cloudy and dull, the kind of sky that never lets you know what time it really is. The whole time we sat there, we barely talked. Every time I thought about the laughter, my stomach turned. Lucas kept fidgeting, tapping his fingers, stretching his neck. Rory stared at the ground like he was trying not to think about anything. When it started getting dark, we headed back. The sun never really came out, but the sky dimmed in that way that tells you it's almost night. As we walked back into the house, everything felt fine. Not warm or cheerful, just normal. The sound in the house was back. The fridge hum, a creak in the floor, the heater clicking on, the smell of something faintly sweet, maybe a candle my mom had left burning. It all felt like the house again. When my parents came home, they didn't ask where we'd been. They acted like they didn't even notice we were gone. That part still gets to me. They should have seen the missed calls. My mom's phone was sitting on the table, and I watched her pick it up, check it, and put it back down like nothing was wrong. I didn't say anything that night. None of us did. But later, after dinner, I went down to the basement. I didn't even know why. Just had this feeling like I needed to look. That's when I found the stuffed bear. It was one I kept on my bed, brown with a red ribbon around its neck. I hadn't touched it in weeks, and there was no reason for it to be down there. It didn't make sounds. It didn't even have a battery slot. Just a soft, stitched face. But there it was, sitting in the corner by the water heater, facing the wall. I didn't tell anyone. I just picked it up, carried it to the trash, and threw it away. The next morning, Lucas said the whole thing had been a prank, that he set it up to scare me. Said he used his phone to play the sounds and left the bear downstairs as a clue. But that didn't explain the calls, or the bakery, or Rory. It didn't explain why Lucas didn't remember anything clearly the day after that. When I brought it up a few days later, he shrugged and said he didn't know what I was talking about. Rory refused to talk about it. Still does even now years later. I want to believe it was all some weird coincidence. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks. Maybe I was sick. Maybe the quiet got to me. But even now, I still get chills thinking about that whistling. That strange, slow tune that didn't belong anywhere near my home. And I've never felt more alone than I did that morning, standing in my own kitchen, trying to call a house full of people who had somehow disappeared. It was Christmas Eve, and like every year, our entire family gathered at my aunt's house. I was 8 years old at the time. Even though that was years ago, I can still remember the energy of that night. How the house felt like it was bursting at the seams, alive with movement, sound, and color. That's how it always was during the holidays in our family. Being Hispanic, it wasn't just a small get-together. It was a full house. Cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, babies, teenagers, friends of the family, neighbors dropping by for tamales. It was chaos, the good kind. The whole house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Literally every light was on. Upstairs, downstairs, hallway lights, bedroom lights, even the garage light. Music played on both floors, different tracks overlapping, old school cumbias in one room and English pop in the other. People were dancing, some were drinking, and in the kitchen, my mom and my aunts were laughing over pots of food, frying, boiling, heating up trays of stuff they'd made earlier. I remember sitting at the kids' table eating something hot and cheesy when someone walked in from the backyard and said the tamales were ready, and half the room cleared out instantly. Everything was loud, the kind of loud where you can barely hear yourself think. And I liked that. I liked the comfort of that chaos, of knowing that people were nearby, laughing and talking, and that I could just be a kid and enjoy it. But things changed around 1 a.m. I remember the exact time, because I had just snuck into the living room to check the microwave clock. I was hoping to see if it was close to midnight, thinking we'd open presents soon. But right when I turned the corner into the hall, the lights blinked once, and then cut out entirely. Everything, music, lights, appliances, stopped. Like a switch had been flipped for the whole house. The microwave clock went black. There was a beat of silence, like a breath held. And then everyone started talking over each other, joking, yelling across rooms, lighting their phones for some kind of light. It wasn't too unusual. My aunt's place was older, and outages happened sometimes. But this one was full blackout. No flickering, no warning. Even the outdoor floodlight, which ran on a different circuit, was out. My uncle started yelling about checking the breaker, and there was some discussion between the adults about what to do. I don't know why I volunteered, but I did. Maybe it was the adventure of it. Maybe I just wanted something to do. My Uncle Joe said he was heading down to the cellar to check the fuse box, and I said I'd come with him. No one stopped me. I think they were too distracted with trying to keep candles from blowing out and managing all the younger kids who were starting to cry. We walked through the kitchen, which was eerily quiet now without the sizzling and the background music. Even the oven's hum was gone. My uncle opened the door that led to the cellar stairs. That door had always made me uncomfortable. It was narrow and painted the same color as the kitchen walls, like it wanted to disappear. The stairs creaked immediately under our weight, loud enough that I winced. There was no light at all. My uncle had a small flashlight, the cheap plastic kind, and even that gave off barely enough light to see where to put our feet. I kept my hand on his shoulder the whole way down, not because I was scared. I told myself I wasn't, but because I couldn't see anything past his silhouette. I was scared of stepping wrong and falling. The cellar had a dirt floor. Not full dirt, but that old cement floor that's so weathered it feels like compact earth, cold and rough underfoot. The air was different down there. Heavier. Dusty. It smelled like wet stone and old rusted metal. Like something that hadn't been moved or cleaned in a very long time. The walls were brick, and the entire place felt like it had sunk into the ground and never been touched again. There was one small window on the far end, a horizontal one, the kind that sits high near the ceiling and usually gives just enough light to make shapes out during the day. But tonight it was no help. Outside was pitch black. Not the usual suburban night black, where there's some glow from nearby houses or the moon. No, this was thick, deep black. Not even a reflection in the glass. It might as well have been painted over. I stayed close behind him as he moved, his free hand outstretched, my hand clutching his shoulder. We were both quiet. Neither of us spoke. Our footsteps made a soft, grinding noise as we moved, the kind that echoed weirdly when there was no other sound. The flashlight flickered once, and I remember squeezing his shoulder tighter. He didn't say anything, just adjusted his grip on the light. Then, maybe halfway across the cellar, we both heard something. A faint shuffling noise, ahead of us and to the right. It wasn't loud. It sounded like something moving across the floor. Not quickly, not in a panic, just slow. Casual, almost. Like someone dragging a blanket. I didn't say anything, and neither did he. He just slowed down. The beam from the flashlight pointed ahead, but it only lit up a thin slice of space. Nothing moved inside the light. I told myself it was rats. Maybe a possum. It was a cellar after all, old and never really cleaned. Probably all sorts of animals used it at night. My uncle cleared his throat and stepped forward again, and I followed. About 5 steps later, he stopped. The silence came back. I was about to ask him if he saw something when he turned slightly toward me and said in a low, sharp voice, "Did you just slap me?" I was confused. The air had that stillness to it again, like it was holding its breath, waiting. I told him no. I hadn't moved. My hand had been on his shoulder the entire time. I was too short to reach his back, anyway, and we were walking slow. There hadn't been any noise. A slap would have echoed, and I would have felt it too, him jerking forward or reacting. But he was standing still, just confused. He stood there for a moment, then muttered something under his breath, and kept walking. I could tell he was unsettled. The way his steps were faster, more urgent. Not quite panic, but not relaxed either. We reached the breaker box, maybe 2 minutes later. The fuse box was mounted on a brick wall with rusted screws. He opened it and started flipping switches. A few seconds later, the lights upstairs blinked back on, and we heard the low thump of music restarting. The entire house seemed to breathe again above us. Life resumed. We climbed back upstairs. The kitchen lights were on, and people were already laughing again like nothing had happened. Someone had found tequila. The kids were back to chasing each other around the living room. I stayed near the stairway for a minute, just watching everyone. My uncle moved to the sink to wash his hands and roll his sleeves back down. That's when I noticed it. He was rubbing his back, wincing. I asked if he was okay. He didn't answer at first. Then he called over his wife and asked her to check his back. He said it felt like something was tingling or burning on his skin, like when your foot falls asleep but sharper. She lifted the back of his shirt, and I heard her gasp before she said anything. It was a handprint, a full handprint on his upper back, slightly left of center. Big, red. The kind of red that comes from being slapped hard, a deep, painful flush. You could see the individual fingers, slightly spread, the heel of the palm pressing into the muscle between his shoulder blade and spine. It was angry-looking, fresh, but there had been no noise, no struggle. No reaction. Nothing. People gathered around to see, and almost immediately the room changed. The laughter dipped. Voices lowered. In our culture, stuff like that doesn't just get brushed off. Someone said it looked too big to be mine. Another pointed out that there were only 2 of us down there. That even if I had done it, the sound would have been obvious. My uncle would have reacted. But he hadn't. He had just asked me calmly if I'd slapped him. That was it. Everyone had their own theories. My grandma went into a back bedroom to pray. My mom lit a candle and left it in the window. The adults started muttering about bad spirits and things you weren't supposed to talk about in front of the kids. My uncle stayed quiet for most of the night. He said the tingling went away after a while, but the mark stayed until the next day. Later, when things had calmed down, I lay on the couch under a blanket, thinking about what happened. I tried to go over everything logically. What had we heard? A rat? Something falling over? Maybe he brushed up against something that left a mark? But the slap, the print, none of that made sense. I kept coming back to one thing. I was right behind him, close enough to touch. My hand was on his shoulder the whole time. If someone or something had managed to get close enough to slap him, I would have noticed. I would have heard the steps or felt the air move, or at the very least heard the sound. But there was nothing. Just silence. Cold, heavy, total silence. We never went back down there. At least, not me. My uncle moved out of state a few years later. He never brought up that night again. Neither did I. But I remember it every Christmas. When the lights flicker. When I hear too much silence in a noisy house. When I feel that instinctive sense that someone is standing just behind me in the dark. It stayed with me. Not as some supernatural story. Not as a ghost tale we laugh about. But as a real moment, unexplained and buried in the past. A reminder that sometimes, Even in the middle of family and music and bright lights, something can reach through the dark and touch you without warning, without sound, and you may never know how or why, only that it happened. I was about 10 years old when we had to put my cat down. His name was Sabbath. Big, fat, black cat. He was about 12 years old, and he'd been with me as far back as I could remember. He'd been diabetic for a while, and my mom just couldn't afford the treatment anymore. I didn't understand it all then, not really. I knew he needed medicine. I knew he wasn't doing well. I knew mom was stressed and tired all the time, and that every trip to the vet made things worse. I guess she did what she had to do. Doesn't mean it didn't tear something out of me. Sabbath wasn't just a pet. He was my shadow. If I was in the kitchen, he was in the kitchen. If I was on the couch, he was curled next to me. And every night, without fail, he'd be curled into a ball on the foot of my bed before I even got under the covers. If my door was closed, he'd cry outside it until I opened it. He didn't like being away from me, not even for a minute. He tolerated everything from me. Everything. I was a dumb kid, too rough and way too curious. I used to tug his tail, dress him up in old doll clothes, carry him around like a football. And he never once clawed me. Not even a scratch. Just that look he gave me, that tired kind of cat expression that somehow still managed to say, "I'm putting up with this because I love you." I remember when I overheard my mom on the phone with the vet. I was standing in the hallway outside her bedroom. Her voice was quiet, but I could tell it wasn't a happy kind of quiet. She was trying not to cry. That was the first time I understood something really bad was about to happen. She didn't tell me straight away. She waited until the night before. She sat me down on the couch and explained that Sabbath was very sick, that he was in pain, and that we couldn't make him better. And then she said tomorrow we'd be taking him to the vet for the last time. I didn't want to believe her. It didn't feel real. I didn't want to go to bed that night. I just lay on the couch with Sabbath curled on my chest. I didn't cry. I just kept petting him over and over again, like if I touched him enough he'd somehow stay. But in the morning, I couldn't do it. I couldn't go with them to the vet. I was scared. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want my last memory of him to be on that cold table, scared and confused. So I stayed home, curled up in my bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling while my mom and Sabbath drove away. I didn't say goodbye. Not properly. And it's something I've regretted ever since. After that, the house just felt different. I guess I never noticed before how much of my day involved that cat. I'd walk into a room and catch myself waiting for him to follow me in. I'd drop something on the floor and expect him to come sniff at it. Every little habit I had, it all had some piece of him in it. Even bedtime felt empty. I'd lay there in the dark, staring at the bottom corner of the bed where he used to curl up, half hoping to see that dark lump there again. My mom was quiet about it. She didn't want to talk about it too much. She made a small box of Sabbath's things, his collar, his favorite toy, even that crinkly mouse that had long since lost its shape. She let me decide where to keep it. I stashed it in my closet behind a pile of old board games, like I wasn't sure if I wanted to remember or forget. A few weeks passed, maybe a couple months. Honestly, that whole stretch of time is kind of a blur. I still had school, still saw my friends, but everything felt muted, dull. I'd come home and sit on my bed just listening to the silence. There's a kind of noise a house makes when it's empty. Not like creaking wood or wind outside the windows, more like the absence of a heartbeat. That's how it felt. One day, late afternoon, maybe early evening, I was lying on my bed playing video games. It was still light out, but the sun was on its way down. I remember the room was lit mostly by the screen in front of me, with that soft orange wash from the setting sun coming in through the blinds. I had my bedroom door half open, and everything felt pretty normal. Then something weird happened. There was this little red laser pointer on my desk, just a cheap one I'd gotten a week or two earlier. I hadn't really used it much. It sat on my desk near the edge, just sitting there in a tangle of random junk, rubber bands, pencils, loose paper. I hadn't touched it all day. Suddenly, out of nowhere, it blinked on. Just a quick little flicker. Not a full beam across the wall or anything, just a pulse of red light, like it was turning on for a second and then shutting off. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe the batteries were low and something shorted. But then it flickered again. Same exact pattern. Just a quick blink, then off. I sat up on my elbows, eyes locked on the pointer. It was one of those cheap, twist-on kinds. You had to physically twist the cap for it to activate. There wasn't a button. So it wasn't like something was pushing it by accident. And it was just sitting there. Still. Not rolling or moving. Just blinking. It stopped the second I moved closer. Like it was reacting to me. I sat there for a while, staring at it. Every now and then it would flicker. Same timing, same little burst of light. And for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was trying to get my attention. Not in a creepy movie kind of way. Not like I thought it was a ghost or something. Just a weird feeling in my chest. Like when someone taps your shoulder and you turn around and there's no one there. I picked up the pointer and turned it around in my hands. It felt cold, heavier than I remembered. I twisted the cap. Nothing. No light. Tried again. Still nothing. I opened the back and checked the batteries. Dead. That didn't make sense. I mean, if the batteries were dead, how was it flickering? I sat there for a long time just thinking about it. My brain kept trying to come up with reasons. Maybe the last bit of battery power had caused a short. Maybe the metal casing held just enough charge to fire one last weak beam. But why only when I wasn't moving? Why did it stop every time I got close? I don't really remember what I did for the rest of the night. I think I just laid there on the bed until the sun fully set and the room went dark. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't play games. I just sat there thinking. And then I started crying. Not loud, sobbing cries. Just quiet ones. The kind where the tears run down your cheeks, and you don't even know when they started. I cried because I missed him. Because I never said goodbye. Because I still expected to hear him meow outside my door. And maybe, just maybe, I cried because I wanted to believe that the laser pointer meant something. That night, I went to bed early. I opened the closet and pulled out that old box of Sabbath's things. I laid his collar on my desk next to the laser pointer. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted to feel close to him again. Over the next few days, nothing else happened. No more blinking. No strange noises. Just the normal quiet of my room. Eventually, I stopped thinking about the laser. Life went on. School, friends, summer. Years later, when I was older, I found that same laser pointer in a drawer while cleaning. The batteries were corroded. The inside was rusted out. There was no way it should have worked that day. But it did. Now I'm an adult. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in spirits or fairy tales. I believe in science, in evidence, in things we can test and measure. And yet, that day still sits in the back of my mind like a book I never finished reading. I've tried to explain it away. Electrical discharge, faulty wiring, coincidence. But deep down, something in me remembers the way that flicker looked. The timing of it. The way it paused when I looked. The way it seemed to wait. I don't think it was a ghost. I don't think it was anything supernatural. But I do think that sometimes in rare moments, things align in a way that hits you just right. Like the universe holding up a mirror and letting you see what you need to see. Maybe it was just a dying battery. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe my grief filled in the blanks and made something small feel bigger. But whatever it was, it made me feel like Sabbath was still with me. Just for a moment. Just enough. It was the last time I ever felt anything like that. I've had pets since. I've had losses. But that moment stands alone, like a single pinprick in time that stayed lit far longer than it should have. I still keep his collar in a drawer. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night and the house is quiet and still, I swear I feel the weight of something warm at the foot of my bed. But when I look, there's nothing there. And that's okay, because I don't need to see him to remember how much he meant to me. I carry that with me always. Growing up, I was one of those kids who had way too much freedom without really understanding what that meant. I wasn't neglected or anything like that. My parents just worked opposite shifts. My mom worked the early morning and daytime shifts at a local diner, usually leaving the house just after sunrise and getting back around dinner time. My dad worked the night shift as a security guard at some warehouse on the other side of town. He'd come home around 6 in the morning, grab a cup of coffee, sometimes chat with my mom for a few minutes while she got ready, and then go straight to bed. That left me alone. A lot. I wasn't old enough to be left home alone by most people's standards. I was maybe 6 or 7 at the time, but my parents didn't have a lot of options. My mom used to joke that I was a good kid and wise for my age, which probably just meant I didn't set the house on fire or run out into traffic. But when I look back now, I realized how unsupervised I really was. And what that meant. I had the whole day to myself, usually from around 7 a.m. to 5 or 6 p.m. I had a few toys, an old TV in the living room that only had basic cable, and some books I barely ever touched. At first, the freedom felt amazing. No one to tell me what to do, what not to do. I could pour myself a bowl of cereal, drag my blanket into the living room, and watch cartoons until the sun was high in the sky. Sometimes I'd sneak cookies or chips from the kitchen. Other days, I'd try to wake up my dad just to talk to him or get him to play with me. But he'd always be half asleep and grumbling. Most of the time, I just left him alone. But it didn't take long for boredom to set in. A few hours of TV and eating junk only went so far. The silence would creep in, and the apartment felt weirdly empty, even though my dad was in the other room. I didn't really have any neighborhood friends to play with either. We lived in a small, two-bedroom unit on the second floor of an old brick building. The hallway always smelled like dust and old shoes. I never liked being outside without one of my parents, and no one else in the building had kids my age. That's when I started messing around with the home phone. It was one of those beige cordless phones with the rubbery buttons that made a soft click when you pressed them. I'd carry it into my room, crawl under my blanket, and just start pressing buttons. Sometimes I'd mash as many as I could, like 15 or 20 digits. Sometimes I'd try patterns, like all threes or a countdown from 9 to 1. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just curious. Most of the time, nothing happened. I'd get a long beep or that weird automated voice telling me I needed to check the number. But once in a while, someone would actually pick up. It scared me the first time. I remember the shock of hearing someone say hello from the other end. I froze. I didn't know what to say, so I just hung up. But after the initial nervousness passed, it became kind of fun, like a game. I started calling random numbers on purpose. Sometimes a woman would answer and say hello a few times before giving up. Other times I'd get an annoyed, "Who is this?" before hanging up. It became a kind of weird routine. I liked hearing different voices and pretending I was on a spy mission or something. There were a few times when the people got angry and scolded me. "You shouldn't be calling strangers, little boy," one old man said once, and I remember feeling my cheeks get hot even though he couldn't see me. I knew what I was doing wasn't okay, but I didn't really think of it as dangerous. I was a kid. No one had told me anything about phone safety beyond, "Don't call 911 unless it's an emergency." That was about it. But then came the call I still think about, even now. It was a regular day. The sun was out, Mom had just left for work, and Dad was already snoring behind the closed door of their bedroom. I poured myself some cereal, watched TV for maybe an hour, and then got bored. I grabbed the phone off the base and went back to my room. I still remember the way the blinds cast lines of sunlight across the carpet. I crawled under the blanket, like I usually did, and started pressing buttons. I didn't even look at what I was dialing. Just random numbers. I heard the ring on the other end. 1, 2. Then a man answered. "Hello," he said. His voice was calm. Not old, not young. Just regular. A man's voice. I hesitated. Then I asked, "What's your name?" There was a pause. I almost thought he'd hung up. Then he said, "It's Santa." I lit up. I actually gasped. "Santa? Really?" He laughed just a little. "Yep, Santa Claus." I was thrilled. I mean, this was it. The real Santa, answering a call on a random day when I was bored out of my mind. I was still young enough to believe in all that stuff. I thought maybe this was some magical thing that only happened once in a lifetime. I started firing off questions like a machine gun. What was the North Pole like? Did the elves really make toys? Was Rudolph real? Had he gotten my letter? He answered them all in short, simple responses. Always friendly. Always patient. He said Rudolph was resting, the elves were hard at work, and he remembered getting my letter. I didn't even realize I hadn't sent one that year. I was just too caught up in the excitement. I don't know how long we talked. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Time felt like it had stopped. I was under the blanket, grinning like an idiot, feeling like the most special kid in the world. Then something changed. His tone didn't shift right away, but what he said next didn't feel right. He said, "One of my elves made a mistake, though." I said, "What do you mean?" "He lost your address. We've been looking and looking, but we just can't find it." I sat up a little. "You lost my address?" "Yeah, and if we don't get it soon, I might not be able to bring your presents this year." That hit hard. I remember my throat tightening. But I don't know it, I said. I don't remember it. It's really important, he said. You don't want to miss Christmas, do you? I started panicking. I felt tears building in my eyes. I tried to remember the street name. I tried to think about the numbers I'd seen on the mailboxes. But I didn't know. I was too little. I never had to memorize it before. He was quiet on the line, not encouraging, just waiting. I said, I'm sorry. I don't know it. I don't want to miss Christmas. My chest hurt. I felt like I was doing something wrong, like I was failing some kind of test. I didn't even question why Santa would need to ask a kid for their address. I just believed it. I wanted to believe it. Eventually, I dropped the phone and ran out of my room crying. I remember my feet thudding against the hallway floor, my little hands slamming against my parents' bedroom door. I burst in yelling, Santa needs our address. My dad shot up from the bed, startled and angry. What the hell are you talking about? He growled. I shoved the phone at him, repeating, he needs our address. I don't know it. He grabbed the phone from my hand, pressing it to his ear. Silence. Then he looked at the screen. Whatever he saw there, I'll never know. But his face changed. His brows lowered and his mouth tightened. He hung up and put the phone down on the nightstand. He didn't yell. He didn't say much. He just told me not to ever do that again. His voice was firm, serious. Later that night, after Mom got home, they had a long talk in the kitchen. I sat in the hallway listening. They weren't yelling, but their voices were low and fast. My dad told her everything. I heard words like creep, and how did he know to say Santa? And we have to be more careful. After that, the phone was always kept out of reach, either in their bedroom or on top of the fridge where I couldn't get to it. I never got to use it again unless someone handed it to me first. Nothing ever came of it, at least not that I know of. No one ever showed up at our door. There weren't any strange cars or knocks late at night, but it stuck with me. Not just because I'd been tricked, but because of how easy it had been for that man to know exactly what to say, to hold my attention, to keep me talking. It's hard to explain the feeling. It wasn't just fear. It was this deep, sick understanding that not everyone is who they say they are. That even when you're in your own house, safe and warm, something could still reach you, find you. As I got older, I thought about it less. I buried it under school and friends and teenage drama. But even now, when I see a cordless phone, or when I hear about scams, or people pretending to be someone else online, it all comes rushing back. That man had no business talking to a child the way he did. He had no way of knowing I was just a bored kid dialing random numbers. But once he realized I was young, he leaned into it. He used it. That wasn't an accident. And sometimes late at night, I still wonder what he would have done if I had known my address. If I'd given it to him. I'll never know. And honestly, I don't want to. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment back then, one of those places you move into when you're trying to figure your life out, but still need a roof over your head. It was a decent unit, nothing fancy. Beige carpets that never really looked clean no matter how much I vacuumed, old tile in the kitchen, and the kind of walls that made you feel like your neighbors were living inside your ears. But it was mine. I made it feel like home with string lights, a couple rugs, and whatever random furniture I could afford or find secondhand. The bedroom was my favorite spot, probably because it was where I spent most of my time. It had one window, and during the day, light would pour through it in these golden strips that made the place feel warmer than it actually was. Just off to the side of the room, there was a walk-in closet. Nothing huge, maybe the size of a small bathroom, but it was deep and had shelves lining the right-hand wall and a clothing rack on the left. I kept everything in there: clothes, shoes, bags, old books, a couple of storage boxes with cords I didn't know what to do with. That closet always smelled like detergent and something faintly plastic, probably from a bag of old electronics sitting in the corner. I never thought much about it. At the time, my boyfriend was living with me. Well, more like staying with me for weeks at a time. It started with a weekend bag, and then suddenly his stuff was everywhere. I didn't mind. We weren't in the best place relationship-wise, but things hadn't fully fallen apart yet. Most nights, we'd fall asleep with the TV casting some low light onto the ceiling, and I'd usually wake up around 2 or 3 a.m. to turn it off. One night, though, something different happened. I don't remember what time it was, but I know it was late. Definitely the kind of late where everything's still and the silence feels thick. I was in a deep sleep when I woke up to this loud thud. Sharp, Sudden. Close. My eyes snapped open, and I immediately broke into a sweat. I didn't move. My body felt paralyzed, not from any medical thing, just this instinct that told me not to make a sound. Not even a breath louder than necessary. The sound had come from the closet. My first thought was that something had fallen, maybe one of the bags I kept on the upper shelf, but my body didn't care about logic in that moment. It was like all my muscles went stiff. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like I could hear it inside my head. I lay there frozen, tucked under the blankets like they could somehow shield me from whatever might be standing in that dark closet. I kept my eyes closed tight. I didn't even try to look. I just stayed still, trying not to breathe too loudly, trying to wait it out. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Light was coming in through the window like it always did. I still felt that tightness in my chest from the night before, but now it had faded into something easier to ignore. I got out of bed, stretched, and walked into the closet, mostly out of curiosity. Sure enough, one of the canvas bags I kept on the top shelf had fallen. It was laying on the floor in front of the laundry basket. I picked it up, checked inside. Nothing important, just old scarves and an umbrella I thought I'd lost. I let out a breath. Just gravity, I figured. Maybe I didn't wedge it up there properly. I moved on with my day. Took a quick shower, got dressed, started making coffee. That's when my boyfriend came out of the bathroom, towel slung over his shoulder, and mentioned something about a dream. I didn't think anything of it. He always had weird dreams. But then he said it was about the closet. I asked him what about it. I figured he'd heard the sound too, and maybe his brain spun a dream around it. But he just looked at me and said, "I saw you in the closet walking backwards." That was it. He didn't say anything else, just shrugged and walked into the kitchen. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was his way of messing with me, but it didn't feel like a joke. It stuck in my brain like a splinter. The closet. Me walking backwards. I never sleepwalk. I've never had issues with that, not even once. And besides, I remembered exactly how I'd spent the night. Paralyzed under the blankets, too scared to move. Eventually we broke up for unrelated reasons, and he moved out. I stayed. The apartment had this strange comfort to it, even with that moment lingering in my head. I always kept the closet door shut after that. Not out of fear, really, just habit. Like closing it gave me some kind of control. A couple years later, I moved to a new unit in the same complex. Same layout, just a little brighter, a little cleaner. By then I had a new boyfriend, someone who didn't believe in much beyond what he could touch or measure. He was calm, grounded, funny in this dry, straightforward way. We'd been living together for a few months already, and things were good. The past felt like a different lifetime. Then one morning, I was brushing my teeth when he came into the bathroom and leaned against the doorframe. He was casual, still half asleep, scratching at the back of his head like he was trying to remember something. Then he said, "So I woke up and saw you standing in the closet last night." I dropped the toothbrush into the sink. I hadn't told him anything about what happened in the other unit. Nothing about the bag falling or the dream or the walking backwards. I never mentioned any of it to anyone after that day. And I certainly wasn't in the closet last night. I didn't know what to say. He didn't seem creeped out, more like puzzled. I think he thought I was sleepwalking, but I knew I hadn't been. I'd gone to bed like always, turned off the light, curled up next to him, and stayed there until morning. I had no gaps in memory, no signs I'd gotten up at all. And again, I don't sleepwalk. I never have. I've never even had the urge to. That day I felt like my skin didn't fit right. I kept thinking about his words over and over again. You were standing in the closet. That was two different men, in two different apartments, years apart, both telling me they saw me in the closet while I was asleep in bed. Or at least, I thought I was. After that, I started paying attention to the nights more closely. I downloaded a sleep tracking app on my phone, one that uses the microphone to monitor noises while you sleep. Every night, I'd turn it on, set it on my nightstand, and try to forget about it. Most nights were uneventful. It would pick up the sound of sheets rustling, the occasional snore, and once a loud car passing by outside. But one morning, after about 2 weeks of recording, I was scrolling through the app, and I found a clip that made my stomach drop. It was from around 3:14 a.m. The app labeled it as loud noise. I played it back. There was this short, high-pitched creak, almost like the hinge of a door turning very slowly. Then nothing. Just silence for about 5 seconds. And then footsteps, 2, maybe 3. Slow, like bare feet on carpet. Then another creak, softer this time. And then breathing. Not snoring, not shifting in bed. Breathing that sounded like it was right up next to the phone. I didn't remember waking up. I didn't remember getting out of bed. I didn't feel tired that day. There were no signs of anything unusual in the apartment when I woke up. But that recording made something shift in me. Like it pulled the thread on something I hadn't wanted to look at too closely. I stopped using the app after that. I didn't want to know. A few weeks later, I was reorganizing the closet. It was a Sunday, and I'd had coffee and one of those mornings where you feel motivated to clean everything. I pulled everything out: shoes, boxes, bags, clothes. I wiped down the shelves, vacuumed the floor, dusted the corners. When I went to put the top shelf stuff back, I found something I didn't recognize. It was a small black notebook, slim, with a cracked spine. I didn't keep journals, and my boyfriend definitely didn't own anything like that. I opened it. Most of the pages were blank. But near the middle, someone had written a single sentence in red pen, in small, precise handwriting. Asterisk, you keep coming back here, even though you don't know why. Asterisk. That was it. Just that one line. I sat on the floor for a long time, just staring at it. The notebook felt old, dusty edges, the kind of paper that had yellowed slightly. I tried asking my boyfriend if he'd ever seen it before. He hadn't. I even called the leasing office to ask if someone might have left something behind from a previous tenant, but they told me all the units are cleared and cleaned thoroughly between leases. That made me think back to the first apartment again. The first closet, the bag falling, the dream, the second time being seen standing there. It didn't make sense. Nothing ever did. But I started to wonder, what if I was getting up at night and standing there? What if I really was? Not sleepwalking exactly, but drawn somehow, like a loop I couldn't feel pulling me. I started locking the closet door at night. Literally with a small latch I installed myself, just to make sure. Some nights I even pushed a chair in front of it, but every morning it would still be locked. Nothing ever seemed out of place. Still, I'd wake up feeling unsettled, as if I'd missed something important. I never told anyone else about any of this. Eventually, we moved out of that apartment. We found a place across town. More space, newer building, no shared walls. No walk-in closet either. Just a regular one with a sliding door. I haven't had anything like that happen since. Not once. But every now and then, I'll catch myself staring at a doorway for just a second too long. Or I'll wake up in the middle of the night and feel that old heaviness in my chest, the kind I felt the night the bag fell. I'll remind myself that I'm safe, that I've moved on, that nothing is waiting in the dark. Still, sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I hear that slow creak of a hinge again. And I don't know if it's real, or if some part of me just never really left. When I was a kid, around 6 or 7, I used to sleep in this little room at the back of our house. It had one small window that looked out onto the side yard, and on summer nights, if the wind was blowing right, I could hear the leaves from the big oak tree brushing against the glass. We lived in a quiet area, not exactly the countryside, but not quite the suburbs either. The kind of place where you could walk for a few minutes and suddenly find yourself staring at miles of open land and cornfields that felt like they had no end. I used to love that quiet, the way everything felt still and safe. At least, I did before all of this happened. It started with a dream my mother had. I didn't know about it at the time, obviously. She told me years later, once I was older. But when I think back, I can see how something changed in her right after. She looked at me differently. More often. Longer. Like she was checking to make sure I was really there. She stopped letting me go outside on my own, even in our backyard. I used to throw a fit about it, not understanding. I just thought she was being overprotective. But it was more than that. In her dream, she said I went missing. That's how it began, me gone. She didn't know how or when. Just one minute I was there, and then I wasn't. And after that, things got worse. She started getting letters through the post. Envelopes without return addresses. Inside them were photographs. Pictures of me. Crying. Hurt. Scared. Some of them had smudges on them, as if they were dirty or handled with greasy fingers. In the dream, the pictures didn't come all at once either. They trickled in, a few each week, and with each new set I looked worse. More beaten, more frightened. Sometimes I was tied up. Sometimes there was blood. She told her sister about the dream, and one of her close friends. But she didn't tell anyone the last part. not even them. She couldn't bring herself to say it. In the dream, after weeks of searching, they found my body in a cornfield not too far from our house. I was lying face up in the dirt, in my blue Thomas the Tank Engine pajamas, the same ones I always wore when I was little. They were soaked in blood. She said it wasn't the kind of blood from a clean injury. It was everywhere. Thick, sticky, like someone had let me bleed out over hours. And there was one specific detail, that haunted her the most. My fingers. All 10 of them were missing. Just clean stubs left where they used to be. Bitten off. She didn't tell anyone that detail. Not even my dad. She kept it buried. She said she felt sick for days after waking up. Like it wasn't just a nightmare, but some kind of message. But how do you even begin to explain something like that to someone without sounding insane? Anyway, life moved on. At least on the surface. I kept playing, going to school, watching cartoons, and sleeping in my little room. But I think something shifted after that. Something quiet and invisible, like a door opening just a crack somewhere in the dark. And then, about 2 weeks later, I had a nightmare too. It was so vivid, I can still remember the smell. I came screaming into my mother's room, waking her and my dad both. My body felt like it was on fire. My throat was raw. I was crying and shaking so bad I almost threw up. My mom grabbed me and held me close, asking what had happened, but I couldn't explain it at first. It took a while before the words came out, and when they did, her face went pale. I told her about the man. I said he took me, that he grabbed me from outside our house and dragged me into a car. I didn't know what kind. It was dark, and the windows were fogged up, but I could feel the cold plastic of the seat against my face. He drove for a while. I don't know how long. Time felt strange in the dream, slow and stretched, like it was melting. Then he pulled me into a house. Not a big one, just some shack or cabin. I remember the walls were wood, and there was this awful damp smell, like mold, old sweat, and something else, like iron. He beat me, hard, not with a belt or his hands, with something else, something heavy. I remember the pain, not sharp but deep, like my whole body was bruised. And then he started taking pictures, over and over, even when I cried, especially when I cried. He'd snap a photo every time I screamed. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it didn't make sense, just muttering under his breath, repeating things. Sometimes it was my name, sometimes it was about trains. Eventually, he dragged me outside, through some woods and into the back fields, cornfields. I recognized the sound of the stalks brushing against me. I remember the sky too. It was cloudy, but you could see some moonlight poking through. He pushed me down into the dirt and sat on top of me. I couldn't move. I tried screaming again, but nothing came out. Then he grabbed my hands. I remember the pressure, the way he held my fingers one at a time. And then the pain. It was worse than anything I'd ever imagined. He bit them, one by one, ripped them off with his teeth. The sound of the skin tearing and the crunch of bone. I passed out before he finished, I think. But before I did, I knew I wasn't going to wake up again. When I told my mom that part, about the fingers, she froze. I didn't know it then, but that was the part she hadn't told anyone. The one detail from her nightmare that she swore to keep to herself. And here I was, just a little kid, telling her the exact same thing without ever hearing a word of it from her or anyone else. She said something broke inside her that morning. Something big. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just went to my room, opened my drawer, took my Thomas pajamas, and walked straight outside to the trash bin. She threw them in and closed the lid. I remember watching her from the hallway, thinking I'd done something wrong. Things changed after that. For both of us. She started locking every window, even in the day. Got a new security system installed. She pulled me out of the public school and started homeschooling me. My dad was confused, angry sometimes, but she told him it was for the best, that I wasn't safe. He didn't understand what she meant. She never told him the full dream, not even after my nightmare. She said it would only scare him and make things worse. But she never let me wear those pajamas again. She started watching my hands constantly, as if making sure all my fingers were still there. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at me while I slept. Not in a creepy way, but like she needed to see me breathing. For years, I didn't understand any of it. I moved on. Kind of. I still had nightmares now and then, but they were never as vivid as that one. I stopped talking about it. So did my mom. It became this silent thing between us, buried under the routine of normal life. but it never really went away. Then, when I was 17, I overheard her telling my aunt about it at a family get-together. They thought I was outside. I heard the words again: blood, cornfield, photographs, fingers. That's when it clicked. That my dream hadn't just been mine. That it came from somewhere else. Maybe from her. Maybe from something bigger than either of us. I don't know. But it wasn't just coincidence. I started digging around online, looking up local cases, missing kids, anything that might line up. I found a few things. A couple of cold cases from nearby towns. Kids who vanished without a trace. No suspects. No leads. But none of them matched what we dreamed. No reports of photographs. No cornfield discoveries. Nothing about fingers. It was like our story belonged to us alone. Some shared nightmare that touched down for a brief moment and then disappeared again, leaving only its weight behind. And maybe that's what makes it worse. The not knowing. The wondering whether it was a warning or just some cruel accident of the brain. A coincidence so exact that it couldn't be. Now, years later, I still think about it sometimes. The way my mother's face changed that morning when I told her about the man in the field. The way she held my hands and wouldn't let go. I still have all my fingers. I still hate cornfields. I haven't worn pajamas with cartoons on them since I was a kid. Nothing ever happened to me in real life. I was never taken. I never got hurt. But something happened. Something real enough to change the way we lived. Something real enough to leave a mark that's still there. Even if you can't see it. Even if it never made the news or showed up in a police report. Some things don't need to happen for real to be true. That dream, hers and mine, was one of them. Back when I was in college, 7, maybe 8 years ago now, I found myself in a bit of a bind right as summer break was starting. I hadn't really thought ahead about housing. I was that kind of student. Not irresponsible, exactly, just lazy, distracted, always putting things off until they couldn't be ignored anymore. So when the lease on my apartment ended, and I had nowhere else lined up, I was scrambling. My parents had come to town that week, visiting for a few days and helping me pack up my stuff, and they could tell I was stressed. I was trying to act like it wasn't a big deal, but it was. I didn't have anywhere to go, and I didn't want to be stuck couch surfing all summer. We started looking right away. Everything near campus was either too expensive or already taken. Most students had sorted their plans weeks earlier. It was pure luck that we found the place we did. It was this low, beige duplex across the street from the university, the kind of building you'd never notice unless you were really looking. One of those squat, square places that looked more like a bunker than a house. A basement apartment had just become available that day. The guy showing it to us, a middle-aged man with a long face and cheap suit, told us the last tenant had backed out last minute, so he was offering a great deal. It wasn't much, but it was furnished. That was a big plus since I didn't have a lot of furniture, and I was only going to be there for 3 months. My parents seemed more relieved than anything. It was close to school, cheap, and ready to move into that very day. The landlord even waived the deposit just to get someone in. It all felt too easy. The apartment itself was laid out strangely. You came down a set of concrete stairs on the side of the building and into this small, musty entryway. The front door opened right into the main room, kind of a hybrid living room and dining space. There was a worn brown loveseat that pulled out into a bed, a chipped coffee table, and a small round table pushed into one corner with 2 wobbly chairs. The carpet was thin, stained in a few spots, and had that old smell, like something that had been wet once and never fully dried. Immediately to the right was a narrow kitchen, galley style, with mismatched cabinets and a fridge that made a buzzing noise every 15 minutes or so. Further down that side was the bathroom, which was small but clean enough. At least it had a good shower head. On the left side of the main room, there was this strange little hallway. It wasn't even a real hallway, just this small connection, maybe 4 feet long, that led into the bedroom. It always felt off to me, like it didn't belong in the layout. Almost like it had been added later, like someone carved out that extra bit of space just to say it was a 1-bedroom. The bedroom had no windows. Just 4 walls, a double bed, a nightstand, and a wooden dresser. It wasn't small, exactly, but it felt like it was pressing in on you. The walls were a dull off-white, and the carpet in there was different, darker, like they replaced it at some point. There was a small closet with a sliding door. One of the doors was off its track and leaned slightly forward, like it might fall if you looked at it the wrong way. The moment I stepped in there, something in me tightened. It was subtle. I didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. Just that creeping sense of unease, like someone had been standing in there just before I opened the door. I told myself I was just tired, that moving and searching for a place had drained me, and that any new space would feel weird at first. Still, I didn't sleep in that room. I set myself up on the pull-out couch instead. It wasn't the most comfortable thing in the world, but it was fine. Plus, I liked being in the front of the apartment. Even though the little basement windows were at sidewalk level and didn't let in much light, at least there was some natural light during the day. The bedroom was like a box, a sealed box. That whole summer, I kept that bedroom door shut. I wasn't scared, exactly. It just didn't feel right. Whenever I was watching TV or playing games, I would sometimes catch myself glancing over at the door, like I was expecting it to move, like something behind it might be listening. At first, I just brushed it off. It's easy to get creeped out when you're living alone in a place you didn't choose. It wasn't like anything actually happened. No strange noises, no furniture moving on its own. It was just a feeling, a low, constant sense of not being entirely alone. I didn't talk about it much. I mentioned it once or twice to my friends when we were hanging out. Just a quick, I don't like that bedroom, man. Or that apartment's got weird vibes. They laughed, called me a baby. I let it go. They were right. I wasn't usually the type to believe in any of that stuff. I didn't believe in ghosts or curses or any of that. I still don't. The summer came and went. I passed my classes, worked a part-time job, spent a lot of nights at friends' places, and counted the days until I could move into a better place for the fall. When the lease ended, I packed up my stuff, gave the keys back to that tired-looking landlord, and didn't think about it again. Not until years later. It was about 2 years ago, a random Tuesday evening, when I got a text from one of my old college buddies. I hadn't heard from him in months. "Hey Lord Panda," it said, using my old college nickname. "Was your door number XXXX back in uni? That basement across from campus?" I replied yeah, wondering why he was asking. He didn't answer right away, but when he did, he sent me a photo. It was a grainy black and white scan of an old newspaper page. Looked like it had been photographed from a library archive. The image showed the obituary section of the local paper. In the middle of the page was a photo of a young woman, early 20s maybe. She had shoulder-length hair and one of those big smiles people only seem to have in yearbook photos. Just below her picture was a shot of a door, plain beige, with the number XXXX clearly visible. My stomach dropped. The caption underneath said she had died by suicide in her apartment. The date was from 2009. She had hung herself in her bedroom's closet. I didn't say anything right away, just stared at my phone for a while. It felt like someone had opened a trap door beneath me. It all made sense in a way that I wish it hadn't. I couldn't stop thinking about that closet. The one with the broken door that leaned forward like it wanted to fall. I remembered standing in that room, not being able to breathe right. The feeling that something was wrong. That someone had been there before me and never really left. It wasn't a ghost story. I know that. Nothing haunted me. Nothing followed me after I moved out. But there was something heavy in that place. A sadness that soaked into the walls. I'd felt it without knowing why. That weight. That presence. Just the knowledge that something awful had happened there. That someone had lived their last days in that windowless, quiet room. Alone. After that, I started remembering little things. The way I always turned off the hallway light immediately after passing it. The fact that I never even unpacked into that room. That I never used the closet, not once. I didn't even open it after the first day. It's strange, the things we pick up on without understanding. Our bodies know before our minds do. Some part of me was screaming that something was wrong, and I didn't listen. Not really. I just kept the door shut and hoped it would go away. I never found out who she was. I could have searched her name. I had the article, I had the date, but I didn't. It felt invasive. Like it wasn't my place. All I needed to know was already written in the silence of that room. I told a couple people about it later. They gave me that look. The one where they don't know whether to believe you or not. Or maybe they just don't want to. Some said I should have sued the landlord, but he didn't break any laws. That kind of thing isn't always disclosed unless you ask directly. And even if he had told us, I doubt I would have stayed there. But it was 3 months of my life, and it's over now. Still, every now and then, when I think about that summer, I picture that door. Closed. just standing there at the edge of my vision while I watched TV or ate dinner alone. I remember how I never walked by it without quickening my steps, how the apartment always felt just a little too cold, and I wonder how long it would have taken for me to understand what I was feeling if I'd never seen that photo. Sometimes places remember, even when no one else does. A few years ago, my husband started working the night shift. It was a tough adjustment for all of us. The kids missed him during their evenings, and I missed the feeling of having another adult in the house after dark. He worked about a 45-minute drive away, so when he left around 9:30 at night, I wouldn't see him again until about 6 in the morning. Those nights often felt long and strangely quiet, especially once the kids went to bed. The silence seemed to stretch out, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. This particular night started out normal enough. It was a Thursday, I think. The kind of day that feels like it's just hanging in the middle of the week, too far from Monday to feel busy, but not close enough to the weekend to be relaxing. I had made spaghetti for dinner, a quick meal the kids always ate without complaining. We didn't do anything special, just the usual routine. Homework at the kitchen table, a little bit of arguing over who got to pick the show to watch after dinner, the sound of dishes clinking as I cleaned up. The weather outside had turned colder than usual for the time of year. I remember that clearly because the windows were slightly fogged up and I had pulled an extra blanket out for the kids earlier in the evening. We live in a single-story house that's not huge, but it's enough for us. 3 bedrooms, a small but cozy living room, a connected kitchen and dining area, and a master bedroom just off the dining room. The flooring is mostly hardwood, especially in the shared spaces, and it creaks if you step in just the right spot, especially at night when everything else is quiet. Around 9:30, right after my husband left for work, I told the kids, my son who was 8 at the time and my daughter who was 6, that they could watch a movie in my bed. It was something I'd let them do occasionally, especially on nights when I felt a little uneasy or just wanted us all to be in the same space. It made me feel safer somehow. The 3 of us climbed into bed, blankets all around us, the laptop balanced on a pillow in front of us. The movie they picked was a silly animated one they'd seen at least 5 times, but I didn't mind. I figured they'd fall asleep halfway through like they always did. It was already late, around 10 or a little after. Before settling in, I did my usual lockup routine, front door, back door, windows, checked to make sure the garage was shut, turned off all the lights except the one in the dining room. That one I left on for my husband. I always did. It was a soft yellow light, not too bright, but just enough to help him see when he came in early mornings. Then I went back into the bedroom and left the door mostly shut, just an inch or so open to keep the light from pouring in. About 40 minutes into the movie, I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was part of the movie, but the sound came again, slow and distinct, the unmistakable creak and tap of someone walking across the hardwood floor. Our bedroom is directly off the dining room, and with the door cracked open, you can hear anything that happens out there pretty clearly. I paused the movie without thinking. The kids didn't even notice. They were already drifting off, warm and sleepy under the blankets. The sound of walking came again. It wasn't fast or loud, just steady, back and forth, like someone pacing. I thought maybe, just maybe, my husband had come home early. He had done that once or twice before. Maybe his shift got cut short or something happened at work. I sat there for a minute, listening, waiting for him to walk through the door. But he didn't. The footsteps just kept moving, steady, deliberate, across the dining room and back. I stared at the sliver of light coming in from the open crack of the door, waiting for the shadow of feet or some sign he was about to come in. Still nothing. Just walking, and then a pause, and then more walking. After about 5 minutes, I started to feel that creeping chill in my gut. Something wasn't right. If it was my husband, why hadn't he come in yet? Why would he just pace the dining room without saying anything? I didn't hear keys, or the door opening, or the sound of his work boots being taken off. I waited another minute, unsure if I was just being paranoid, but then decided I needed to check. I wasn't going to be able to relax until I saw him. I whispered to the kids to stay put, just in case they were awake, and quietly slid out of bed. I moved toward the door slowly, trying not to let the hardwood creak under my feet. As I reached the door and opened it fully, the footsteps stopped. I stood there in the doorway, staring out into the dining room. It was empty. The light I had left on cast a warm glow across the dining room table and chairs. Everything looked completely normal. Nothing out of place. I stood still, straining to hear anything, any movement, any breathing, but there was nothing. Just silence. I walked through the dining room, my eyes darting to every shadow, and then into the living room. Still nothing. I checked the front door. It was locked. The deadbolt was still turned. I turned on more lights as I moved through the house. The hallway, the bathroom, both kids' bedrooms. Every room was quiet, undisturbed. Then the kitchen. I stepped into the kitchen and looked around. Nothing there either. No open windows, no doors ajar, no signs that anything had been touched. I opened the back door to check the porch light. That's when I heard a soft meow behind me. I almost laughed. My whole body had been tense, my heart beating hard in my chest, and I thought, of course, it was the cat. He must have been walking around the dining room, his paws making that soft tapping noise on the hardwood. I turned around to let him in and froze. He wasn't inside. He was outside, sitting on the porch. His yellow eyes blinked up at me, head tilted slightly. He meowed again, louder this time, like he was asking to be let in. My hand was still on the doorknob. I checked the lock again. It was still locked. I hadn't opened that door all night. I stared at him for a long moment, my mind trying to piece things together. He couldn't have made those sounds. He wasn't in the house. My stomach turned. I locked the door again and went back through the house, this time checking everything with more urgency. Closets, under the beds, inside the bathroom shower. I turned on every light and even opened the garage. Nothing. There was absolutely no one there. No signs of forced entry. No unlocked windows. Nothing. I tried to tell myself maybe I had imagined the sound. Maybe the cat had been scratching at the door or moving outside, and it somehow echoed through the house. But it didn't sit right. The footsteps had been inside. Clear, steady, real. I wasn't the kind of person who imagined things like that. My phone buzzed then, and I jumped. It was my husband. He was calling from work, just checking in like he usually did. I picked it up, and I remember I was about to tell him that I thought he had come home early, that I'd heard something, but before I could say anything, he told me something that made my knees go weak. He said that a house a few streets over had been broken into earlier that day. Police had been called. It happened in the early afternoon, and it seemed like whoever did it was just trying doors and windows until they found one open. He said to double-check that everything was locked up, just to be safe. I think he was just trying to be helpful. He had no idea what had just happened. I told him everything was locked, said I'd call him later, and hung up. I didn't tell him what I'd heard. Not yet. I didn't want to make a big deal if it really was just my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone had been there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in bed with the kids, one on each side of me, while they slept soundly under the blankets. Every creak of the house made me jump. I kept the lights on. At one point, I even pulled a kitchen chair into the hallway outside the bedroom so I could watch the front door. When the sun finally started to rise, I felt that tight knot in my stomach start to loosen just a little. My husband got home just after 6. I didn't even wait for him to take off his shoes. I told him everything. He searched the house again, checked all the doors and windows, but just like me, he didn't find anything. We ended up installing a camera system not long after that. Just the basic kind that alerts your phone when there's movement. I never had another night quite like that again, but I've never forgotten how it felt. Not because anything happened, really, but because something could have, and I wouldn't have even known it. That's what scared me the most. The idea that someone could have been right there, just on the other side of a thin wall. Close enough to hear us. Close enough to watch. Maybe even waiting. I think about it sometimes when the house gets too quiet. When the kids are asleep and my husband's working late and I'm the only one awake. I'll be brushing my teeth or folding laundry, and suddenly I'll remember those footsteps. The way they stopped the second I opened the door. I'll never know who it was, or what they wanted, or if they ever came back. But I lock the doors more carefully now. I double-check every window. And on nights when it's just me and the kids, I leave more than one light on. Not because I'm scared of the dark, but because I'm scared of what could be hiding in the quiet. I grew up on a piece of land that bordered a game preserve. It wasn't fenced or anything, and there were no signs warning you where the property line ended and the preserve began. It was all just woods, thick with oaks, maples, and the occasional pine. My brothers and I used to spend entire days out there, playing army, building forts, or just wandering. When we were little, we ran wild like it was our own personal kingdom. We knew every deer path, every downed tree, every patch of ferns, and every spot where mushrooms popped up in the fall. We had trails we'd made ourselves and shortcuts only we used. It was home. Back then, I didn't think much about being out there alone. We weren't afraid of the woods. Sometimes things would spook us, a coyote's howl too close, or the rustle of a big animal in the brush. But that was rare. Most of the time, it felt normal, natural. We had an outhouse behind our house, and if you had to go at night, you walked out into those woods alone. The path was short but dark. It wasn't like the suburbs, or even town where there are lights on every porch and traffic in the distance. Our nights were pitch black except for the moon, and the silence could be so thick it felt like cotton in your ears. But even when I was a kid, every now and then I'd get that crawling feeling on the back of my neck. That strange pressure like something was watching me from the tree line, especially when I was out there at night. Not every night, not even most nights, but sometimes. It'd hit like a wall. 1 second everything was normal, crickets chirping, wind in the trees, maybe a distant owl, and then suddenly everything would just stop, like the woods were holding their breath, like they knew something I didn't. Those moments didn't happen often, but when they did, I'd finish up quick, walk fast back to the house, and not look over my shoulder. Because I knew if I did, I'd see something I didn't want to see. Years went by. Nothing major ever happened. We grew up, kind of. My older brother got his license. My younger brother started caring more about video games than being outside, and I found myself spending more time alone in the woods. It was spring. I was about 14 or 15. I'd gotten really into terrariums for some reason. Probably saw something on TV about moss and frogs and decided I wanted one. So I told my mom I was heading out to get some plants, and I grabbed a little spade and an old peanut butter jar I'd cleaned out. The day was perfect. Not too hot, not too cool. The kind of spring day where everything feels alive and fresh. Green was exploding out of every branch. You could smell the damp earth and last year's leaves rotting underfoot. Sunlight filtered through the trees like honey. I wasn't even wearing a jacket. I took the public dirt laying near our house. It was basically just a rough road that ran between two wooded properties. Technically public, but only people who lived nearby ever used it. We used it all the time, especially with the dogs. I didn't bring the dogs that day, though. They'd been acting weird all morning, lying low, not wanting to go out. I didn't think much of it. I walked maybe 5 minutes down the lane and stepped off it onto our property, a spot I'd walked 1,000 times before. There was a bank that rose maybe 4 or 5 feet off the road, covered in vines and small shrubs. I climbed up it, went in about 40 feet, just enough that the road was out of sight, but I could still hear if a car came by. The plan was simple: collect some moss, maybe a small fern or two, and get back before dinner. I crouched near a fallen log and started scraping up moss into my jar. I was in a good mood. Everything was quiet, peaceful, too quiet. That's when I realized something was off. I couldn't hear any birds. No squirrels skittering through the branches. No buzzing insects. Nothing. At first I thought I was just too focused, and I paused to listen. But there was nothing. Not a sound. That's not normal. In spring, especially a warm day like that, the woods should be bursting with life. Something was wrong. I stood up slowly, feeling that little twinge in my gut, and then I heard it. A tapping sound, faint and rhythmic. Tap, 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 tap. It sounded like it was coming from further up the woods, maybe 50 or 60 feet away. My first thought was a woodpecker. That made sense. I tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach and kept looking for plants, but every time I moved, it tapped. When I stopped, it stopped. At first, it was subtle. I'd step, tap. I'd crunch some leaves, tap, tap. But the timing was too perfect, too responsive. After a couple minutes, it was clear this wasn't just some bird pecking away at a tree. It was following me. Still trying to be logical, I started making a little more noise on purpose. Kicking leaves, dragging my feet. The tapping responded every time. Louder now. Closer. Now it didn't even sound like woodpecking. It had changed. It was slower, more deliberate. Less like a beak on bark and more like slapping. Like someone slapping their bare thighs. Smack, 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 smack. I looked around, but I couldn't see anything. Not a single branch moved. No shadow darted between trees. Nothing. Just the sound. Getting closer. It was like it was toying with me, luring me, letting me believe I could figure it out. That moment, when you realize that the thing in the woods is aware of you, but not in a passive way, in an active way, that's when fear turns to something deeper. Dread. And I felt it like a cold drip down my spine. My chest tightened. I stopped breathing for a second. My legs locked up. That slap, slap, slap was maybe 20 feet away, just beyond a thick patch of saplings and brush. I should have seen something, but there was nothing. And then like a switch flipping, I knew. Whatever it was wrong. Not wrong like injured. Wrong like bad. Like it didn't belong. And it wanted me to keep moving. It had led me into this deeper part of the woods. Lured me with sounds that made just enough sense to not be terrifying, until they weren't. My body moved before my brain fully caught up. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the plants or the jar or the trail. I just ran, crashing through brush, tripping over roots, getting whipped by branches. I didn't even try to be quiet. I threw myself off that bank, didn't even pause to check how steep it was. Hit the dirt lane hard and stumbled forward, knees scraped, palms raw. I don't know why, but I knew I'd be safe on the road. It felt like a boundary, something it wouldn't cross. I didn't stop running until I was nearly within sight of the house. When I finally stopped, panting and shaking, I turned and looked back. The woods were still and silent, but I could feel it. Whatever it was there, watching. It had followed me down. I couldn't see it, but I felt it, maybe 20 feet in, just beyond the edge of sight. I walked fast the rest of the way home, heart pounding in my throat. When I got inside, I went straight to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat there shaking, staring at the wall. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That I got scared of a bird that wasn't a bird? It stayed with me for days. That silence, that tapping, that feeling like something was drawing me in on purpose. I didn't go back in the woods for a long time. Not alone. And even then, never in that spot again. Years passed. I never forgot, but I stopped thinking about it all the time. Buried it, kind of. Then one night, we were sitting around after dinner, just me, my mom, and my little brother. I don't remember how the topic came up, but we were talking about weird things in the woods. I don't know what made me say it, but I told them the story. Every detail. I expected them to laugh. But my brother didn't laugh. He just stared at me. Then, dead serious, he said, "Why do you think I stopped going back there?" I asked what he meant. He said, "It followed me once. From the other side of the road." I didn't know what to say. He wasn't joking. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was remembering. And his face, it looked just like mine must have looked that day on the dirt lane. Pale. Sick. We didn't talk about it much after that. And we never went back to that part of the woods again. We'd stick to the trails near the house, or the ones that looped out toward the creek. Never that side. The dogs never liked it either. I realized later that every time I tried to walk them in that direction, they'd hesitate. Sometimes they'd refuse to go past a certain point. And those were good dogs. Brave dogs. They'd run off coyotes and kill snakes. But not there. Never there. To this day, I don't know what it was. It didn't make sense. It never showed itself. Never made a noise besides that rhythmic slapping sound. But it knew how to move just close enough to keep me curious. Just quiet enough to make me question myself. Just hidden enough to keep me from seeing. But I felt it. And I still remember that moment. Not the running, not the fear. The realization. That perfect, horrifying second where I knew without a doubt that something was out there, something bad, and that it had wanted me to keep walking. I trust that feeling more than anything now. I don't need to see something to believe it's real. That moment taught me everything I needed to know. When the woods go quiet, too quiet, you leave. You don't question it. You don't investigate. You turn around and you go. Because some things don't want to be seen. They just want you close enough not to matter. I haven't thought about this story in years. It honestly never felt like my story, at least not in the way that some people talk about traumatic things that happened to them. It was like something I watched happen from far away, or maybe something I imagined once and then convinced myself was real. But it wasn't made up. I know that now. I know that because I still remember every detail. The smell of the grass, the sting of the sun on the back of my neck, and the cold, heavy feeling I had in my stomach when I talked to that man. I was about 10 or 11 years old, somewhere in that range. That weird age where you think you're grown enough to handle yourself, but still naive enough to believe that nothing truly bad can happen to you when you're surrounded by familiar faces. It was a Saturday, and we had a church league softball game at the local field. I remember it being hot. Not stifling, but that sort of dry heat where the metal bleachers burned your legs if you sat on them for more than a second, and the air felt sharp in your throat when you breathed fast. I was on a team with kids I'd grown up with. We all knew each other from church and Sunday school. My coach was Mr. Donaldson, who also taught Sunday school for the older kids, and his daughter Rachel was our pitcher. The field was surrounded by trees on one side, a small parking lot behind it, and a row of rundown chain-link fences on the other that separated it from a weedy and used lot. It wasn't a professional setup or anything, just a community field with 2 dugouts, a patchy outfield, and a scoreboard that didn't work half the time. That day, I remember I was up soon. I think I was 3 batters away, so I had taken my bat and wandered just a bit down the third base line to get some swings in. Not far enough to be unsupervised. I was still in plain view of the dugout and the bleachers, but far enough that no one was standing right beside me. I liked that spot. It gave me space to swing without smacking into anyone, and I could keep an eye on the batter without being too close to the action. I was doing little practice swings, just sort of keeping my rhythm, when this man walked up to me. He wasn't part of our church. I knew that immediately. I knew most of the adults who came to the games. Even if I didn't know their names, I'd seen them before. This guy didn't fit. He was older, probably in his late 40s or early 50s, with a scruffy face like he hadn't shaved in a few days. He wore a baseball cap that had faded from too much sun and a plain gray t-shirt that was darkened with sweat at the collar and underarms. His jeans were dusty, the kind of dirty that looks more like road dust than actual dirt. Something about him just felt off, but not scary. Not immediately. He came up slow, hands in his pockets, and stood a few feet away. I remember he didn't smile much, but he didn't seem angry or upset either. He just kind of had this bland expression, like someone trying to stay neutral. He asked if I was on the home team. I said yes. Then he asked what league we were, how long I'd been playing, that kind of thing. Small talk. Harmless. I answered because, why wouldn't I? It was daylight. There were parents sitting just over to the right on the bleachers. My coach was only about 20 feet away. I felt safe. Maybe a little unsure, but not in danger. Then he said he was in a bit of a bind. Told me he'd locked his keys in his truck, and his dog was stuck inside. Said the poor thing was probably overheating, and he needed to get in there fast. He pointed back toward the parking lot, and I turned to look. Sure enough, there was a red pickup truck parked at the end of the row, not far from the tree line. It was kind of beat up, old-fashioned. I couldn't see if there was a dog inside or not. The glare from the sun on the windows made it hard to see anything through the glass from where I was. He went on to say that his back window was open. You know the kind, those little sliding windows on older trucks. He said it was open just enough to maybe let a small person crawl through. A kid, maybe someone about my size. He told me he just needed someone to climb through real quick and unlock the door. Wouldn't take more than a minute. He said it would be a huge favor. Now, I'm not stupid. I wasn't back then either. My parents had told me over and over, don't talk to strangers, don't go anywhere with someone you don't know, don't believe everything people say. But those warnings always came with certain images, dark vans, candy, strangers trying to grab you. No one ever warned me about someone standing in the sun, acting polite, with a story that sounded like something that really could happen. And besides, it wasn't like he was asking me to go off into the woods. His truck was right there, just a few hundred feet away. I could still hear the game, still see people. The thing that really scares me now, when I think about it, is how close I was to saying yes. I didn't feel fear then, just confusion, hesitation. I started thinking about how I could do it quickly and get back in time to bat. I even looked over at the dugout to check how close my turn was. I didn't really believe he was lying. Why would he be? That's when the batter hit the ball. A solid hit. I don't remember where it went exactly, but it was enough to move everyone up. My coach called my name, told me I was in the hole, which meant I was 2 batters away. I turned back to the man and told him I was almost up to bat, but I was sure someone else could help him. I probably even pointed to the field or the bleachers. He nodded, didn't say anything else, just nodded and backed off. I watched him walk away. I didn't see where he went exactly, just that he headed back toward the parking lot. After the game, I mentioned it offhand to my parents. Not like it was a big deal. Just one of those guess what happened kind of things. My mom's face changed immediately. She went very still, and my dad sat up straight. They asked me a lot of questions. What did he look like? What was he wearing? What kind of truck? Which direction did he go? Then my dad pulled out his phone and made a call. I didn't know at the time that he was calling the police. I just thought he was telling someone from church. My mom told me that I had done the right thing, but also sat me down and gave me another serious version of the don't go with strangers talk. This time, though, it felt more urgent, more real. They weren't angry, just shaken, but I still didn't really get it. Life moved on. I played a few more games that season. Nothing like that ever happened again. I forgot about it for a long time. Years, really. I'm 26 now. A few years back, we were at a family dinner, and somehow the story came up again. I don't remember who mentioned it. My mom, maybe. Or one of my siblings who remembered bits and pieces. My dad looked at me and said, "We never told you this, but we kept an eye on the news after that." He told me that a few weeks after the game, there was a report about a man who had been arrested nearby for attempted kidnapping. They'd caught him trying to lure a kid into his vehicle using the exact same story. A locked truck, a dog inside, the window just open enough for a kid to crawl through. The truck was the same color and make I'd described. The man matched my description too. Scruffy, mid-40s, baseball cap. He'd done it more than once. That time, the kid he tried it with had screamed. People heard. Someone called the cops. When they picked him up, he had rope, duct tape, and a knife in the back seat of his truck. That detail hit me like a punch in the chest. I couldn't breathe right for a few seconds. I sat there, replaying everything in my mind. The way he'd looked at me, the calm way he talked, the truck just sitting there in the sun waiting. My dad told me that he hadn't wanted to scare me back then, that they felt it was better to let me grow up without being haunted by it. But I'm haunted now, not in a dramatic, horror movie kind of way, not with nightmares or panic attacks. Just this cold, quiet realization that I had been one word away from disappearing. One small decision stood between the life I have now and something that could have ended everything. I think about that sometimes when I see kids playing at parks. When I see them run ahead of their parents or talk to strangers in parking lots. I want to shout at them, asterisk, don't do it, don't trust anyone, not even the ones who seem nice. Asterisk, but I know that doesn't work. They won't hear it until it's too late. I know I didn't. The scariest part isn't what almost happened. The scariest part is how close it came to seeming normal. How easily danger hid inside something that looked like a favor. That's what keeps me up sometimes. Not the memory of the man. Not his face or his voice. It's the memory of myself. The version of me who almost said yes. I've written this story down more times than I can count, but it never seems to come out right. No matter how many drafts I scribble out or try to polish, it's like the real weight of the memory just slips through the cracks of language. I've told it a few times to close friends in person, but I always get this tight feeling in my chest halfway through, like I'm trying to describe a nightmare using a textbook. No matter how many adjectives or comparisons I string together, I can never quite express the thick, unpleasant pressure of the moment. The malice. That's the best word I've come up with. Malice. But even that doesn't feel quite right. It sounds too poetic or too vague. But I'm going to try again. This time I'll just stick to the raw details, and maybe by laying them out simply, you'll understand what I mean. This happened over 10 years ago, but I remember the night with absolute clarity. Not like a memory that fades or softens at the edges over time. This one is still sharp. I can picture the way the light fell across the cheap linoleum floor in the kitchen, the shadow of the fridge stretching out like a long finger. I can remember the exact arrangement of the dishes in the drying rack. I can remember how the air felt too still. I was living alone at the time, in a small, ground-floor apartment in a quiet part of town. The kind of place where the streetlights are far apart and the sidewalks stay empty after sundown. It wasn't a bad neighborhood by any means, just quiet and a bit removed. One of those spread-out complexes where the front doors open directly to the outside rather than into a shared hallway. I liked that about it. It felt private. My apartment had a basic layout. You walked in and stepped straight into the living room. A narrow hallway on the right led to the bathroom and the bedroom, and on the left was the entrance to the kitchen, which was a sort of galley-style setup. stove and counter on one side, sink and a bit more counter on the other. No frills, but it was enough for one person. I wasn't a great sleeper back then. Still not. I've always had this anxious restlessness when I try to settle down. My mind just runs in loops, rehashing useless thoughts. So, getting to sleep by 2 a.m. was actually a good night for me. On this particular night, I'd gotten into bed around midnight, spent the usual hour or two staring at the ceiling in shifting positions, and finally drifted off into something resembling sleep. That's why the sound hit me so hard. The crash didn't just wake me up, it yanked me out of whatever half-dreaming state I'd managed to reach. One moment I was vaguely aware of the hum of the ceiling fan and the weight of the blankets around me, and the next I was bolt upright in bed, heart hammering. It wasn't just a noise. It was the kind of sound that has weight, like something large and solid had been picked up and thrown. My brain went to the cats immediately. I had 2 of them at the time, both adult males I'd raised from kittens. They'd been through everything with me, moves across the country, different apartments, strange roommates, barking dogs, parties, breakups. Nothing fazed them. They were the type to sleep on top of a running vacuum cleaner. So, I assumed the crash was one of their usual antics, maybe chasing each other and knocking something off the counter. I started to push back the blanket to go scold them, annoyed more than anything else. But I stopped when I felt the resistance. Both cats were pressed against me, one against my hip, the other curled near my thigh. And they weren't sleeping. They were completely still, frozen in this tense crouch. Their fur was puffed up like they'd been shocked, ears flattened tight against their heads, pupils so wide their eyes looked entirely black. That stopped me cold. Cats don't get like that unless something is really wrong. And these 2, I'd never seen them look like that before. Not even close. Their bodies were rigid, and they were staring hard toward the hallway that led to the kitchen. Not at me, not around the room. Straight at the hallway. Now I was wide awake. My annoyance vanished instantly. I didn't even really feel fear. Not the kind that makes you want to hide. It was more like this sharp awareness, a kind of prickling under my skin. My body shifted into gear before my mind really caught up. I pulled the blanket back, stood up, and walked barefoot into the hallway. I didn't even think to grab anything. I didn't have a bat or a knife or even a flashlight. I just walked in my underwear across the hall and into the kitchen with the kind of dumb confidence that only comes from being too tired to fully process a situation. I flipped the switch on the wall. The light was that buzzing, yellowish glow that old fluorescent bulbs give off. I blinked a few times, trying to adjust. The kitchen looked mostly normal at first glance. But then I noticed the dish rack. It was supposed to be next to the sink, resting on a folded blue dish towel I kept there to soak up water. When I'd gone to bed, I'd left a ceramic bowl, a couple of forks and spoons, and a small plastic container sitting inside it. I always washed up before bed and left things to dry. Now the entire dish rack, along with everything in it, was over by the stove, 8 feet away. The towel had been dragged halfway across the room and was now lying dead center on the floor. The ceramic bowl was in 3 large pieces and a scatter of smaller shards. The silverware was spread out in a fan-shaped pattern around it. I just stood there. I didn't get scared right away. Not the way you'd think. The first thing I felt was confusion, like my brain couldn't quite connect the dots. I walked over and stood above the mess. I didn't touch anything. I just looked at it. There was no good reason for it. None. I tried to think, maybe the cats had somehow jumped onto the counter, landed in the dish rack, and launched the whole thing like a catapult. But that would have meant they both leapt from a dead sleep onto the counter without making any other noise, then somehow managed to hurl the rack across the kitchen with enough force to break a bowl. And they would have had to leap back into bed with me within seconds, looking like they'd just seen the end of the world. It didn't fit. Nothing about it fit. I didn't say anything out loud. I just turned the light off, walked back to bed, and lay down. The cats hadn't moved. One of them gave a single, low chirping noise, the kind they make when they're extremely unsettled, and then went quiet again. I didn't sleep well the rest of the night. I drifted in and out, kept thinking I was hearing little taps or creaks from the kitchen, but I never got up again. When the sun came up, I walked back in and found everything just as I'd left it. No new mess. No sign of anything else. I cleaned up the broken bowl and put the rest of the stuff back in the rack. I didn't feel scared anymore, just tired and a little off balance. For a long time after that, I kept turning it over in my mind. I tried to find the angle, the piece of logic I'd missed. some mechanical explanation. Some physics-based reason the dish rack might have launched itself across the kitchen. But nothing ever came together. I grew up in a pretty hard-headed household. My dad worked in a machine shop, my mom was a nurse, and the idea of ghosts or spirits or any kind of supernatural nonsense was dismissed out of hand. If something strange happened, there was always a logical explanation, at least according to them. And I took that with me into adulthood. I've always believed that weird things happen, but they're just things we don't fully understand yet. This, though, it stuck with me. I never had anything else like it happen in that apartment. Lived there for another couple of years. The cats went back to normal almost immediately, and I did too, for the most part. But every once in a while, I'd catch myself watching the kitchen from the corner of my eye, especially late at night. Like I was waiting for something else to happen. It never did. Eventually I moved, took a new job in another city, and packed up the last of my stuff from that kitchen like any other move. The dish rack went into a box with some other kitchen things. I don't know if I kept the towel. I got rid of the plastic container. Years later, I still think about it. Not every day, not even every month. But sometimes I'll be standing in my current kitchen, drying off a plate or rearranging dishes, and it'll hit me out of nowhere. That image, blue towel in the middle of the floor, bowl shattered at the base of the stove. The sound of the crash ripping through dead silence. The way the cats looked. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know how it felt. I've stopped trying to explain it. There probably is an explanation. But if there is, I've never found it, and no one I've told has either. I still don't believe in ghosts or spirits or haunted apartments. I believe in weird things, unexplained things, things that happen because we don't know every law or quirk of this world. I believe in accidents, in physics, in coincidences. But I also believe in the weight of silence. And whatever happened that night, whatever moved that dish rack across the kitchen, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. It felt like something was there. Like something had decided to do it. And that something wanted to be noticed. I'll never be able to prove it. I'll never have a photograph or a sound recording or some scientific diagram that makes it make sense. All I have is the memory. And for what it's worth, I've never forgotten it. I came home late that night. I was 17, maybe a couple months away from turning 18, but still in that strange middle space between feeling like an adult and being treated like a kid. It wasn't unusual for me to get home after dark, especially if I'd stayed late at a friend's place or hung around after school. My family didn't worry too much. Our house sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood near the woods, and we'd lived there long enough to feel safe, maybe even a little too comfortable. It was close to midnight when I walked through the door. The lights in the hallway were off. Just the dim glow of the kitchen nightlight flickering from around the corner. I could hear the soft, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wooden floor beneath my sneakers as I tiptoed inside. I locked the door behind me, twisted the bolt, and set my backpack down next to the coat rack. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Everyone else was asleep. I could tell just from the way the silence sat in the house. Thick and heavy. My parents were upstairs. My younger brother's room was across the hall from mine, but his light was off, and I didn't hear his TV murmuring through the walls like I usually did. The whole place felt still, like time had paused. I didn't think much of it. I was used to coming home to that kind of silence. I went into the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water, and then headed down to my room in the basement. I always liked that my room was separate from the others. Downstairs gave me privacy. No one could hear my music or yell at me to turn it down. I didn't have to be quiet on the phone. I could stay up as late as I wanted, and no one would know unless they came down. Plus, something about being surrounded by solid walls and cool air made me feel like I had a space of my own. I flipped on my desk lamp when I got to my room. The main light was too bright, too harsh after a long day. The warm glow from the lamp lit up the desk and a small part of the floor. My room was a mess like usual. Clothes on the floor. A half-eaten bag of chips next to my computer. A couple of empty soda cans by my nightstand. I threw my phone on the bed and sat down in my desk chair, spinning it back and forth a few times, trying to unwind. I checked a few texts, responded to a couple of snaps, then opened my school binder and half-heartedly worked on some homework. After about 20 minutes, I gave up and just started scrolling. Music played quietly from my speaker, something mellow, almost putting me to sleep already. After an hour or so, My eyes started getting heavy. I went through the usual routine, brushed my teeth in the bathroom just outside my room, changed into a hoodie and old sweatpants, then turned off the lamp and climbed into bed. My sheets were a little cold, and I pulled them tight around me, feeling the weight settle in. The soft hum of my fan filled the room. I stared at the ceiling for a bit, my thoughts floating in and out of focus until I finally started to drift off. Sometime later, minutes, maybe an hour, I woke up to a soft rustling sound. It was faint, just barely louder than the white noise from the fan. I rolled over lazily, not even opening my eyes all the way. I figured it was my cat. She had a habit of sneaking into my room and hiding under the bed, sometimes scratching around in the corner or chasing shadows. I muttered something like, "Go to sleep," and turned my face into the pillow. But then it happened again. A longer, slower movement. Not scratching, shifting, and not in one spot. It was like whatever it was adjusting its position, dragging something across the carpet. I kept my eyes closed, not wanting to admit I was now fully awake. I wanted to pretend it was still the cat. Maybe she brought in something she found outside. A mouse, a leaf, a toy, something harmless. But then I heard the breathing. Not my breathing, not the soft, light sound of my cat's purr. This was different. Heavy, deep, controlled, like someone trying not to be loud. A slow inhale, a slower exhale. I froze. My body stiffened up like I'd been dipped in ice. I held my breath without meaning to. I felt every part of my skin go tight. I laid there completely still, eyes wide open now, staring at the wall across the room. My ears strained for the next sound. Every second dragged. My brain started racing. Maybe it was a raccoon? We lived near the woods. Maybe one found its way in through a vent or the basement door. But the breathing didn't match. It didn't sound like a panicked animal. It sounded like someone trying to stay calm. I couldn't move at first. I just laid there, heart pounding so hard it made my throat hurt. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see what was under my bed. I kept imagining something lunging out and grabbing my face the moment I peeked. But I had to know. I had to see. I slowly, carefully rolled onto my side, keeping my blanket wrapped tightly around me. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, not to call anyone yet, just to use the screen light. I didn't want the brightness of the flashlight, just a soft glow so I could see. I tilted the phone down, squinting to guide the light beneath the bed. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't an animal. It was an arm, a thick, hairy arm. Pale skin, long coarse hair, muscle beneath it. A human arm, crammed under my bed. I couldn't see the face. Just that one arm, pressed against the carpet, hand clenched into a fist. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I felt like I was going to throw up or scream, but I couldn't do either. My voice was gone. My lungs were locked up. The world suddenly felt far away, like I wasn't in my body anymore. I pulled my phone back slowly. My brain was screaming at me to move, but I was so scared of what would happen when I got up. What if he grabbed my ankle? What if he had a knife? I kept thinking of the stories I'd read online. People getting slashed in the back of the leg, in the Achilles, unable to walk or run. I didn't want that. I couldn't let that happen. I stayed like that for what felt like forever. Maybe 5 full minutes of just lying there, muscles aching from how tense I was, sweat soaking into my sheets. Then, all at once, I knew I had to do it. I had to run. No thinking. No hesitation. Just move. I threw the blanket off, tucked my feet beneath me, and launched myself off the bed in one clean motion, sprinting straight toward the door. I didn't look back. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest. I hit the door handle so hard it slammed into the wall as I pulled it open. I was halfway into the hallway when I felt it. A hand, grabbing me from behind. Another hand clamped over my mouth. I kicked backward, twisting, but the grip was too strong. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. My legs felt like they were turning to jelly. Then I heard the voice, whispering, begging me not to scream, telling me it was okay, that I knew him. And I did. I don't know how, but in the middle of the chaos, I recognized the voice. It belonged to a guy I had gone out with a few times, someone I'd met through school. We weren't that close, just a few casual dates, some texting, a movie once. We hadn't talked in a while. I hadn't thought much of him. He kept whispering that he didn't mean to scare me, that he didn't know how else to talk to me, that he just wanted to see what I was like when I wasn't around other people. The words didn't make sense. They sounded insane, like something a stalker would say in a bad movie. But he wasn't acting violent, and his voice wasn't angry, just desperate. I started crying. I couldn't stop. I told him to get out, over and over again. My voice cracked. I could barely stand. He finally let go and took a step back, looking at me like I was the one who hurt him, like I was being unreasonable. I stood there, shaking, not sure if I should scream again or collapse. I didn't know what to do. I told him again, leave. Get out. Now. He asked if I'd drive him home. That moment still sticks with me. That question, like he thought this was just some awkward misunderstanding, like I owed him something. I didn't even answer. I just turned around and went upstairs, legs barely working, heart still racing. I didn't stop until I was outside my parents' bedroom door. I banged on it until it opened. They had no idea what was going on. They sleep like they're in comas. By the time I tried to explain, he was gone. We didn't call the cops. I should have. I know that now. But I was 17. I was scared. My parents thought it was just a weird mistake, a guy who made a bad decision. I told them he was just a friend who got confused, that he wouldn't do it again, that I told him off. And they believed it. They believed me because they wanted to, because it made things simpler. But it wasn't simple, and it wasn't okay. For months, I couldn't sleep without checking under my bed 5 times. I started locking my bedroom door. I stopped answering unknown texts. I even moved some furniture around so no one could hide under anything. I started having dreams where I'd wake up with someone in my room, standing over me. I couldn't shake the fear. He never contacted me again. Maybe he realized how insane it was. Or maybe he found someone else to fixate on. I don't know. I don't want to know. That night still haunts me. Not just because of what happened, but because of how close it came to being worse. So much worse. I think about it sometimes when I'm walking alone, or when I hear a sound in the dark. That cold, crawling fear. The kind that freezes your bones and makes you question what's real. I wish I'd screamed louder. I wish I'd woken the house. I wish I'd called the cops and made a report. I wish I hadn't just let him go. But I didn't. And that's something I'll always carry with me. I was 18, still living in my small hometown in East Texas, the kind of place where nothing much happens. Or at least that's what people like to believe. Just a handful of gas stations, a diner that closed early, a main street that felt abandoned after 9 p.m., and roads that stretched too far between one town and the next. The kind of town where folks left their doors unlocked and said goodnight to their neighbors by name. But it was also the kind of place where if something did happen, there wasn't a whole lot around to help you. That night, I was driving back from a party in the next town over. It was close to 2:30 in the morning. I hadn't planned on staying that late, but time slips away when you're young and surrounded by noise and music and people who make you feel alive for a few hours. Still, once the party started thinning out and people began stumbling into cars or laying down on couches, I knew I should head home. I hadn't had anything to drink, just a soda, maybe 2. I liked having a clear head when I drove, especially at night. Especially alone. The drive between towns took about 40 minutes. Just stretches of 2-lane highway bordered by thick woods, open pastures, and the occasional fence line. No streetlights out there. You got your headlights and not much else. It was a cool night, early spring maybe. I remember rolling the window down just enough to let in the breeze, letting the warm air of the party get swept away. The radio barely picked up anything out that far, just a fading country song mixed with static. I let it play anyway. Maybe 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed the headlights behind me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It wasn't uncommon for another car to pop up on the road, even that late. Maybe someone else heading home from the same party, or someone starting their morning early. But as the minutes passed, the lights stayed close. Closer than they should have. I slowed down just a little, letting my car drop a few miles under the speed limit. The truck behind me didn't pass. Instead, it slowed down too. I could see in my rearview mirror how close he was riding my bumper. Closer than anyone should. There wasn't another car on the road in either direction. Just me and him. Something about it made my stomach turn. I tried telling myself it was nothing, that maybe it was just some local who didn't want to pass me because of the dark or the curves in the road. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. The kind of driving he was doing, it wasn't normal. It felt intentional. It felt like he wanted me to know he was there, that he wasn't going anywhere. I reached the highway exit that led toward my town. It's a quiet exit, just a short off-ramp that turns into a winding country road flanked by woods on both sides. I took it, hoping maybe that he'd keep going straight, that he was just using the same highway, and our paths had coincidentally overlapped. But the second I turned off, his headlights followed. Same distance, same pressure, no hesitation. Now I was scared. I couldn't call anyone. It was 1978. No cell phones, no GPS, no apps to send a location or ping a friend. If you were alone, you were alone. And out there, I was more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I gripped the wheel tighter and kept my eyes forward. The road curved and dipped, and every time I glanced in the mirror, he was still there, always right behind me. I passed familiar landmarks. The old barn that had burned down the year before. A broken-down sign advertising a ranch that didn't exist anymore. The overgrown field where we used to park and watch the stars in high school. I was getting closer to home, but that wasn't comforting, because the last thing I wanted was to lead him there. I couldn't pull into our driveway. I couldn't let him see where I lived. My parents were asleep. My little brother's room was closest to the road. What if he followed me home? What if he waited until I went inside and then came back later? My hands were sweating. My jaw was locked. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to do something, anything, but I didn't know what. I couldn't think. About a mile from the house, I saw the side pull-off spot. It was just a shoulder, really, where the road widened enough for a car to stop safely. We'd used it once when we had a flat tire, and I remembered it was far enough from houses that no one would see you, but close enough that if I needed to run, I could. I made a quick decision. I pulled over. My heart was hammering so loud I could barely hear anything else. I slid the gear into park, hit the lock on the door, and stared straight ahead. The truck pulled in behind me. The beams of his headlights filled my car, flooding it with bright white light. I couldn't see anything in my mirrors but glare. I had no idea what he looked like. I only knew that he had followed me for over half an hour and hadn't made a single move to pass. And now he was parked 10 feet behind me. I sat there, frozen. I didn't move. I didn't look back. I didn't reach for anything. I just stared at the dark road ahead and tried to breathe through the rising panic that was closing in on my chest. A minute passed, then another, and another. Still nothing. Then I heard it. His door opened. It made a long creak that felt impossibly loud in the quiet night. Then the slam. Footsteps. Gravel crunching under boots. Slow, deliberate. One step at a time. Coming toward me. I looked into my driver's side mirror and finally saw him. A tall man. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but I saw the outline of his body. Broad shoulders. Slow stride. His arm swung slightly as he walked, and in his hand there was something long. Metal. Reflecting the light. It was a knife. I didn't even have time to think. My breath caught in my throat. He was only a few feet from my door, and I could see his hand reaching out toward the handle. That's when I slammed my foot on the gas. My tires kicked up gravel as I shot forward. The engine roared louder than it ever had, and I didn't look back. I just drove, faster than I'd ever driven that road. My whole body was shaking. I kept expecting to see his headlights behind me again, but they didn't come. I made it to the edge of our driveway and didn't turn in. I passed our house and kept going another few miles until I reached a corner store that had lights on 24 hours for deliveries. I parked right under the front lamp and sat there, trying to calm down, trying not to cry. Eventually, I drove back home. It must have been after 4 a.m. by then. I parked in the garage and crept into the house without waking anyone. Locked every door, every window. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I went out and looked over my car. Nothing broken. No scratches. No signs he'd tried to force his way in. It was almost like nothing had happened. Except I knew it had. I never told the police. I didn't even know what I'd tell them. I didn't have a license plate. I didn't know who he was. Just that he followed me for over 30 miles and tried to get into my car with a knife. I told my parents eventually. My mom cried. My dad was furious but helpless. It was too late to do anything. Just another quiet road in Texas, another night, another story. I've thought about that night more times than I can count. Every time I hear someone say small towns are safer. Every time someone laughs at the idea of being followed. Every time my own daughter asks if she can take the car out late with her friends. That's why I told her. Because it stayed with me. The headlights, the gravel, that metal glint in the dark, and the simple, terrifying fact that if I hadn't driven off right when I did, if I'd waited another second, just one, he would have had the door open. And I don't know what would have happened after that, but I know it wouldn't have ended well.